They said her gift was useless. I cannot keep the promise.
The cult summoned the wrong woman. They had prepared the ritual for a saint. They had lit the candles, drawn the circles, and stood in their black robes with the hush of a country that had waited a century for the one who would save it. What they got was two women. One was the girl they had meant, 17, glowing, her heavenly blessing written over her head in letters of light that spelled Saint Vow. The other was Sachi, 21, exhausted, in an office skirt and low black pumps, holding a work bag with a half-finished presentation in it. The word that appeared over her head was Disassembly, a construction skill, a dismantler's trade, the kind of blessing you gave to people who would never matter. The saint looked at her. The saint laughed. She called Sachi an ant. She told the robes she did not need an old woman slowing her down. The cult laughed with her. They put a circlet on her head, a robe of white and gold around her shoulders, and they walked her out of the chamber to meet the prince of the country. Not one of them looked back, and the skill they had written off as a clerical accident, the useless one, the one they had not bothered to understand, was, in less than a year, going to dismantle a sea serpent in 17 pieces at arm's length, kill an A-rank manticore on a battlefield in a foreign kingdom, walk past the hero party on the deck of a ship they had begged her to join, take the heart of a prince the kingdom had been trying to kill since he was 12. But that is the ending. This is where it started. Before we go back to that night, if this hook got you, take a second and do me a small favor. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you're new here, because the algorithm decides who sees this story, and your tap is what tells it to send it further. And in the comments, drop the city you're watching from right now. I want to know where in the world this story is landing tonight. I read every single one. Alright, back to Sachi. She was 21 years old. She had worked at a company whose name is not worth the page to print it, because the name was the only impressive thing about it. She had no parents. They had died when she was small enough to remember the funeral, and too small to remember their voices. Her grandfather had raised her after that. He ran a diner that smelled like soy and sesame, and the kind of patience that does not exist anymore. He told her, before he got sick, that she should become someone with an education first and a kitchen second. The kitchen would always be there, he said. He was wrong. He died her 3rd year of high school. She never opened the kitchen. She worked late. She always worked late. The night the story actually starts, she left the office past midnight, presentation half finished, and she cut through an alley she had never used before because she needed to catch the last train. There was a high school girl in the alley, walking and muttering English vocabulary into her phone. Sachi noticed her the way a person notices a stranger who is not in their day. She was thinking about her presentation. A circle of light opened under her feet. It was white and turning, and it had writing in it, and the writing was not in any language she knew. The girl's phone fell. Sachi reached for it on instinct. Her hand did not arrive. She felt her body lifting, and then thinning, and then nothing at all. And the last thing she thought, embarrassingly, was that she had not finished slide 11. She woke up on a stone floor in a chamber lit by torches. There were people in black robes. They were chanting. The high school girl was beside her, on her knees, glowing faintly, looking around like she had won something. A man came forward, red hair, round glasses, a long blue coat, and asked, very politely, if he could appraise her. He used a word she did not understand. She nodded because nodding seemed safe. The chamber went quiet. The high school girl was appraised first. Saint. The robes bowed. A cheer went up that shook the torches. Then they appraised Sachi. The red-haired man's face changed. He read the result a second time. He read it a third. The chamber leaned forward. Disassembly. The girl laughed. Sachi would spend the rest of her life remembering the exact pitch of that laugh. The girl told the robes she did not need an ant slowing her down. She said it like it was funny. The robes laughed with her. They put a circlet on her head, and they put a robe of white and gold around her shoulders, and they walked her out to meet the prince. And not one of them looked back at Sachi. The chamber emptied. The torches went on burning. She was alone in a stone room in a world she had not asked for, and she had been there for less than 5 minutes, and the people who were supposed to save her had already decided she was not worth the trip back. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. She was thinking, with the same flat efficiency she had used on the presentation, about whether anyone in this world would feed her. The red-haired man cleared his throat. He had not left. He apologized. He bowed so deeply, his glasses slid down his nose. His ears were red. He told her his name was Alfred, that the summoning was an accident, that he was sub-master of an adventurer's guild in a kingdom called Doran, that they were always short on monster dismantling staff, and that if she came with him, there would be a room and a meal and a bath at the end of it. He said all of this while looking at the floor like a man who expected to be hit. She said yes before he had finished the sentence. She did not say it because she trusted him. She said it because, in the room she had just been left in, he was the only person still looking at her. The math was very simple. They walked out of the basement into a city she could not describe properly because she was too busy not crying to notice the architecture. The guild building was loud. Adventurers shouted across each other at a long curved counter. There was a quest board with letters on it she would learn later, a through F, and a smell of leather and smoke and food. Alfred took her past all of it to a back room with 3 long stainless steel tables and a wall of knives. This, he explained gently, was where she would work. The next morning, a man named Doldo handed her a knife. It was clean and well balanced, and it sat in her hand the way the knives in her grandfather's diner used to sit in her hand. And the only thing he said was, "Girl, it's okay if you fail. Don't force yourself. Take it easy." A young man named Niall put a horn rabbit on the table. He told her the rank, F, beginner, the easiest thing they had, and he stepped back. Sachi asked Alfred how to use the ability. He blinked, adjusted his glasses, and explained that she was to chant the word in her head. She chanted, GAT, Disassembly, and a heat went through her hand, and the knife moved on its own, and the horn rabbit came apart on the table in 5 clean pieces. Meat, skin, horn, fangs, claws. The room went quiet again. She was getting tired of rooms going quiet around her. Doldo whispered, "Too fast." Niall leaned forward without breathing. Roland, who had not spoken yet and would barely speak for 2 more chapters, made a small sound in the back of his throat. A voice, mechanical and bored, spoke inside her head. Experience points acquired. Skill awakened. Dismantle reproduction. She did not know what she had expected. 3 years of high school she had spent learning to use a knife the way her grandfather used a knife. 3 years had become some kind of currency in this world without her agreeing to the exchange. She stood there with a stranger's blood on her apron, and she thought, for the first time since the alley, that maybe she was not a mistake. Alfred saw the apron and fainted. Doldo caught him before he hit the floor. He apologized to her with one hand and dragged Alfred toward the infirmary with the other. "Severe fear of blood," he muttered. "Don't take it personal." She did not take it personal. She had a feeling then that there was a story behind the way Alfred would not look at the apron. She did not ask. Some wounds you do not open on the 3rd day. That afternoon, she dismantled 20 more F-rank monsters. She tried an E-rank wild boar and failed. Her ability was too low, and Doldo explained gently that the levels would come with the work. The next day, she dismantled 10 horn rabbits at once with the new skill, and the voice in her head told her her level had become 2. The day after that, she dismantled a wild bull. The voice told her 3. A receptionist named Anne caught her on her way to lunch on the 4th morning. She had chestnut hair that puffed around her face like she had been running, and she introduced herself as the flower of the receptionist counter, and she invited Sachi to eat with her. And Sachi had not had a friend in so long, she almost said no out of habit. Over lunch, Anne told her about the hero party. The girl from the chamber, Riri, was leaving the next morning with a prince called Brian to fight the Demon King. Anne said it like she was describing the weather. She said, also like she was describing the weather, that worrying about things you could not change was a waste of time. Sachi ate her lunch. She listened. She went back to work and told Roland, almost shyly, that she had made a friend. Roland did not say anything, but he smiled, which was the most she had ever gotten out of him. By the end of 2 weeks, she had not taken a single day off. Alfred came back to the counter for the first time since he had fainted. He was visibly nervous around the apron. He asked, very politely, if he could appraise her again. He took her hand. He went still. He told her her level was 3, D plus speed, D plus precision. Then Doldo, who could not keep a secret if you paid him to, mentioned offhandedly that she had been working without a break since her first day. Alfred and Doldo turned and looked at each other in slow horror, and then both of them looked at her, and an order came down with the speed of a man making up for a wound he had not noticed in time. She was given a day off. She was paid early, 5 gold, 7 silver, 8 copper, more money than she had held in her own hand in months. Anne came over to ask what she was going to do with it. Sachi told her she was going to spend it with her, and Anne lit up like someone had handed her a present. They were planning what city corner to start at when the front door opened, and the noise of the guild dropped by a notch, and a man walked in. He was tall. He had dark blue hair, long and straight, tied loosely at the nape. He had eyes the color of cold amethyst. He had a sword at his hip that looked like it had killed something the day before. He did not look at her. He did not look at anyone. He told the room she was in his way and she should move. She moved. Anne's whole face changed. Receptionist mode instantly. Back straight, hands folded, voice professional. She caught Sachi's eye and tilted her chin, and Sachi understood the signal. Leave. Now. This is mine. Sachi left. She went up to her room. She sat on the edge of the cot the guild had given her, holding 5 gold coins in a hand that was somehow shaking, and she asked the empty room a question she did not yet know she was going to spend the rest of the year answering. Who was that? And answered the question for Sachi the next morning over breakfast, and she did not even wait for her to ask it. She spread butter on her bread, leaned across the table, and told Sachi that the man who had walked in and ordered her out of his way was Mariusz. Just Mariusz. No family name that anyone used. Sword Saint, a blessing so rare that every kingdom on the continent had looked for one, and this kingdom had found him. Maximum ability, level 10. Solo adventurer since he was 15. Killed a dragon at 20, and walked back into the guild still holding the sword he had used, with the dragon's blood still drying on his cloak, and became the only S rank in the country the same afternoon. She said it the way other people read out a weather report. Sachi ate her bread. She made a small noise that was supposed to be a response, and came out instead, like the noise you make when something lands heavier than you were expecting, and noticed. She grinned at her. She took a bite of her amurus and, with a full mouth, told her that the Great Harvest Festival started in a week, that the whole city would be hanging red and purple lanterns for the radish berries, and that the festival brought monsters. Monsters brought Mariusz. Mariusz brought work. Don't worry, she said. He doesn't talk to anyone. You'll hate him by day 3. They walked into Saradin that afternoon. Sachi bought a shirt and a skirt and a dress for the formal guild events she did not know she would be going to, and bought her a tin of ointment for the roughness on her hands. Sachi held the coins in her palm before she paid, and she thought, with something like shock, that she had earned them. The festival began 7 days later, and the counter never stopped. The work came in waves. Radish berries, small tart purple things the size of grapes, to be fermented later into wine, grew in plots outside the city, and every monster in a 30-mile radius wanted them. Adventurers hauled bodies to them faster than they could process. Horn rabbits, ball pigs, longhorns. A twin-headed wolf came in at C rank, and Doldo had to handle it personally because the hide was tough enough to chip a lower-grade blade. He handed the counter to Sachi while he worked. She was the one at the front when the door opened and Mariusz walked through it. He set a black spider down on her table. It was D rank. It had a silk organ under its thorax that his client wanted intact, and he wanted it now. He recognized her. She could tell by the pause, a small flicker, one blink longer than blinks are supposed to be. You, he said. You were the Dismantler. She was not sure whether it was a statement or a question. She said, please wait a moment, and she reached for her knife. The thing she learned that day about her ability was that it kept growing when she was not looking. She had leveled from 3 to 4 somewhere in the middle of the festival rush, and the new cap let her touch D-rank bodies. She moved. The silk organ came away clean. The blade did not bruise the surrounding tissue. She laid the silk in a covered tray, and she slid it toward him, and she waited. He looked at the tray. He looked at the black spider's 5-piece breakdown. He looked at her. Fast, he said. She had been in this world long enough by then to know that a one-word compliment from an S-rank adventurer was not usually a one-word compliment, but she was too tired to savor it. She bowed. She said, thank you. He said, I will ask for you next time, and he walked out. Doldo came back to the counter 10 minutes later and found her processing the next body in a line of 4. He looked at the silk tray. He looked at her. He said, huh, in a tone that felt like a whole paragraph. Mariusz came back the next day, and the day after that. He brought her a 7-colored bird, a black spider, a venom toad, D-rank after D-rank, all of them dropped on her counter with the same cold flat voice and the same standing by the wall patience while she worked. He did not look anywhere else. He stayed until the material was in its tray, and then he left without saying goodbye, and he did it again 12 hours later. On the 4th day, she made him call her by her name. He had said the word you to her for 3 days, and she had decided to stop being anyone's you in this world. She told him very politely that she was called Sachi. He said her name back once, as if testing the shape of it, and then he nodded and set down a venom toad and asked if the organ extraction could be finished by evening. Niall started teasing her about being Mariusz's favorite by lunchtime. Doldo took her aside that afternoon and said quietly that the man was doing it on purpose. The D-rank bodies, the repetition. He was hunting specifically what she could level on, and he was handing them to her in the exact order a trainer would if the trainer wanted you to reach C. She did not know what to do with that information. She stood there with a knife in her hand, looking at the door he had just walked out of, and she felt the heat climb her neck because nobody in the life she had lived before this had ever done anything like that for her on purpose. The festival ended after a week and took her to a tavern on the other side of the square. They ordered ale they did not pay for because the guild ran a tab, and they listened to adventurers one table over shout compliments about the Dismantler at the counter. They had given her a nickname. She was, apparently, the blood-soaked dismantling girl. She and An exchanged a look. Sachi drank her ale faster. An drank her ale faster. Sachi said out loud that she was going to have to do something about that name. Then, An went quiet. She told Sachi the festival had gone strangely this year. Monster activity had been higher than it should have been. The adventurers were calling it an irregular, their word, not hers, and the guild had sent Alfred to investigate. She did not know what he had found. She did not like that she did not know. They finished their drinks in the kind of silence that is not really silence. Alfred found out what it was 2 weeks later. By that time, Sachi had a rhythm at the counter, the D-rank routine, the new unique skills she had earned along the way, a 3-piece fillet application for fish-type monsters, a bone-cutting application for the armorers, and Marriott's was still bringing her bodies daily. She had learned the specific edge of his voice that meant urgent, and the one that meant whenever you can. She had not learned the edge that meant goodbye because he had not used it yet. She learned it that morning. Alfred called the guild hall to order and told them a monster stampede was forming in the North Forest. Not a single monster, a wave. The cause, best guess, was a beast deep in the trees pushing everything else out. 5 teams would be assembled. 4 would hold the city perimeter. The 5th would hunt the source. Marriott's led the 5th. Sachi was in the hallway behind the dismantling room when he came through to collect his gear. She had stopped walking without meaning to. She was holding a rag she had been using to wipe her hands, and she could not seem to put it down. He came up behind her very quietly, which she did not know he could do, and when he spoke, it was over her shoulder and low. "I will come back," he said. She startled. She turned. He was already walking away when he reached a hand back and set it briefly, on the top of her head, not patting, just resting it there, like he was steadying something he had noticed was shaking. He did not look back. At the end of the hallway, he raised one hand without turning, and then he was gone. She stood there for a long time with her rag. The counter worked 3 days without stopping. Healers set up a wing of the guild as a field infirmary. Adventurers limped in with bodies over their shoulders and bodies at their feet, and bodies hauled on makeshift sleds. Roland slept on the counter between shifts. Niall ate standing up. Doldo shouted orders in a voice that did not sound like the man who had handed Sachi a knife and told her to take it easy. They did not stop because they could not stop. She stopped counting on day 2. She started again, out of instinct, on day 3. At some point on the 3rd evening, a report came in that calmed the whole room without quieting it. A dark serpent had been found in the deepest part of the North Forest. B-rank equivalent. Oversized. That was the cause. Marriott's team had eyes on it. Alfred stood in the doorway of the processing room, pushed his glasses up his nose, and said, very quietly, not to let their guard down. An adventurer she knew by face brought her a salamander 10 minutes later. She remembered its scales. She remembered the red of them and how the light through the high window touched the red and made it look like the coals of an old stove. She remembered thinking, with the last piece of her brain that still worked after 3 days, that it was the prettiest thing she had processed all week. She did not notice that it was breathing. The claw came for her throat. What happened next, she did not do on purpose. She was about to be dead. She was pulling back with the slow certainty of someone who has already accepted the ending. And then, the heat that always lived at the base of her hand when she dismantled a body spread up her arm and behind her eyes, and the voice in her head spoke a word it had never spoken before. Extra skill. She did not remember the next 3 breaths. She remembered the knife in her hand, moving faster than her wrist was supposed to move. She remembered the salamander coming apart on the table. She remembered the blade striking something the size of a basketball in its abdomen and ringing like a bell, and then shattering. The room was silent. The counter had stopped working. Doldo and Roland were at her shoulders with blades of their own. They moved her aside. They cut open the stomach. Inside was a pale water blue sphere. The sphere opened. Light spilled out of it. A small creature climbed into the open air, about the size of a kitten, translucent scales the color of a morning pool, 4 tiny clawed feet, membranous wings like stained glass, a long tapering tail, 2 soft horns curved back along its skull. It looked at the room. It looked at the men with knives. It looked at Sachi. It chose her before she understood that it was choosing. It climbed up her apron, set its forelegs on her collarbone, pressed its small nose under her chin, and made a sound like a kettle happy to be found. QE. Alfred came into the room at a dead run. He saw the sphere, saw the creature, saw her, and his face did the thing it only did when he was about to announce something in the voice of a man who had just remembered how to breathe. "It is a pixie dragon," he said. "They are the smallest of the dragon species. They are vanishingly rare. They bond to the person who pulls them from danger. The stampede has broken their normal habitat. She came to us inside a host. You must protect her." Sachi looked at the creature on her collarbone. She heard her own voice ask the little dragon if she would live with her. Pichon pressed her head under Sachi's chin again and purred. Sachi told Alfred she understood. She told Alfred she would. Alfred looked at the blood on her apron and fainted into Doldo's arms. She named her Pichon that night on the edge of her cot. The little dragon chirped the same two-note sound every time Sachi offered her food, and the sound was P, and Sachi was too tired to be clever, and the dragon did not seem to mind. The next morning, the report came in that the dark serpent was down. Mariutz's team was safe. Every member of the 5th was returning. The guild celebrated for 3 days. She wore a violet dress and picked for her. She drank ale she did not pay for. Doldo found her with a skewer of grilled meat and told her, beaming, that the adventurers had given her a new nickname. The blood-soaked version had been retired. The new one was Godspeed Monster Disassembly Girl. He laughed loudly enough that heads turned. He said it was, at least, accurate. She asked him what a custom orichalcum knife would cost. He stopped laughing. He named a number. She did the arithmetic. She told him she would save, and found her in the middle of the arithmetic and whirled her into a half hug. She told Sachi the dress suited her. She said Sachi looked like someone who had stopped surviving and started living. She did not know that was the most generous sentence anyone had ever said to Sachi. Sachi did not tell her. She just held on to her for a second longer than a hug was supposed to last. Pichon was asleep in a basket on her hip. The guild hall was warm. Roland and Niall were dancing in the middle of the floor like they had never been tired a day in their lives. She turned to thank Doldo again, and the crowd parted just enough for her to see him. Mariutz was at the far wall, cloak over one shoulder, a cup in his hand, not drinking, watching. He met her eyes. She told On she would be back. She walked toward him across a hall that had, without her noticing, become the first room in her life she did not want to leave. He did not recognize her at first. An had put Sachi in a dress she had not agreed to wearing and braided the sides of her hair with a ribbon she had not noticed her buying, and told her with a tone that left no room to argue that she was going to the victory party as a person, not as a dismantler. Mariutz looked up when she stopped in front of him, and for a full breath he looked at her the way a man looks at a stranger who has politely interrupted him, and then his amethyst eyes widened slightly, and the red of his ears gave him away before his face did. "Ah, it's you." She asked if he had forgotten her in the week he had been gone. He told her it was because her attire was different. She told him it was not that different. He said flatly, "It's a surprise attack. It can't be helped. It's your fault." And she understood for the first time that an S-rank adventurer could, under the right conditions, be embarrassed. They leaned against the wall together. The folk dancers made a circle in the middle of the hall and broke it and made it again. He told her about the dark serpent in a voice that could have been reading a report. It had been poisoned through, too dangerous to dismantle, burned to ash by a teammate whose blessing was incineration. There had been no body to bring back, nothing for her counter. She told him she was glad he was safe. He looked at her sideways. He asked her, hesitantly, if she had been safe while he was gone. She thought of the salamander's claw and the basketball-sized sphere in its belly, and the kitten-shaped creature asleep now in a basket on her hip. She said yes. He noticed she was staring. She was not staring. She was trying to find the word for the face he was making. He misread the silence, turned a shade darker at the ears, and said, so carefully it sounded rehearsed, "Do you want to dance?" She said yes before her brain had caught up with her mouth. He led badly. He apologized for leading badly. His hand on her waist was professional, and his palm was warm through the dress. And when the song ended, neither of them stepped back right away. She asked for something to say, what he was saving his own coin for. He told her he was not. He asked her what she was saving for. She told him a new knife. The old one had shattered, and she said the word orichalcum the way Anne had taught her to. Mariutz tilted his head. "Come with me to the Maruni mine," he said. "I will escort you, free of charge." She said that was generous. He said it was not generous. It was cheaper than paying a tax on his own boredom, and his ears went red again, and she stopped trying to parse him for the rest of the song. Later, at the edge of the floor, he asked her to use his first name. Doldo did not want her to go. Then, Mariutz appeared at his elbow, told him he would protect her personally, and Doldo's objections turned into a sigh so long she thought he would never finish it. 3 to 5 days. Maruni mine, 2 mornings from now. She spent the next day at an adventurer's shop. A black spider silk shirt, thin enough to fit under her clothes, armor plating cut from armored turtle monsters, mountain boots, a compression pouch for travel. She held all of it in her arms and walked home in the afternoon sun. And at the corner outside the shop, she walked directly into Alfred. He was carrying groceries. The groceries hit the cobblestones when she explained what she had bought them for. He stood there with his red hair and his round glasses, and his ears going very pink, and he asked her, in a voice that was trying very hard to be casual, whether this was wise. She told him Mariusz would be with her. The word Mariusz made his jaw tighten in a way she pretended she did not see. He walked her back to the guild. People greeted him along the street, children shouting, shopkeepers waving, and she watched the way he smiled at them, and she thought about how the people who have been broken once are sometimes the ones who remember to be kind. At the guild doorway, he reached into his coat and handed her a thin leather bracelet with a small silver clasp. He told her, with his eyes on the floor, that it was a magical protection band and she should not take it off until she returned. He told her to promise. She promised. He turned and walked away before she could thank him properly. At the end of the hall, he raised one hand without looking back, and it was almost the exact shape Mariusz's hand had made in that same hallway before the stampede, and she stood very still with a silver clasp glinting on her wrist and understood, for the first time, that she had two people in this world who did not want her to die. The mind trip began the morning after next, under a sun that was pretending not to be cold. Mariusz had a compression pouch that held a two-person tent and folded it into a button she could have lost in the hem of her sleeve. Pichon would not be left behind. She climbed into Sachi's backpack, got comfortable, and refused to be reasonable. At the guild gate, Alfred checked her bracelet one more time. He and Mariusz had a tense exchange neither would explain to her. Mariusz lost his patience first and walked on. She caught up. They passed through the south gate. The gatekeepers wrote their names in a ledger. The road began. They made camp at the forest foot that evening. She cooked hamburgers with her skill trick of minced cutting and a soup with the vegetables they had packed, and Mariusz ate 2 helpings and made a sound he did not seem to have approved of in advance. He said it was good. He said he had not expected it to be good. He said, looking at his bowl, that most people on the road eat whatever they can swallow. Pichon ate her own bowl and climbed back into the backpack and fell asleep upside down. The stars came out. The sleeping bags were arranged side by side. She noticed. He saw her notice. He said, in a voice designed to sound like mission logistics, that it was safer. He would sleep on top of his bag, not in it, so he could be up in a second. He could sense monsters even while asleep. She should wrap up and sleep properly. She asked him, before she understood she was going to, why he always adventured alone. He was quiet for a while. He said it in the end, the way you put down a heavy thing you have been carrying, that in a party, the weakest person's mistakes become the deaths of the strongest. That coordination failed. That people he had once walked with had not walked back. He stopped there. He did not elaborate. She did not push. She had a feeling she would not be the one he told the whole of it to, not yet. And pressing him now would only make him put the lid back on it before she got to see the shape. She said, instead, that she was grateful he had let her come on this trip. He muttered something that sounded like, "You are a strange woman." A meteor crossed the sky above them a minute later. She counted 100 stars before she fell asleep. He stayed up keeping watch. She did not know when he slept. The mine was red-soiled and thin of grass. A 2-headed wolf came out of the rocks on the second morning and was a body. Before she had finished registering, it was alive. Mariusz did not break his walking stride. Pichon led them to the cave. She got agitated at a turn in the rocks they would have passed. She flew ahead, came back, flew ahead again. They followed. The cave mouth was narrow and tall and deep enough that the torchlight did not reach the back. Lantern grass grew in the small pools near the entrance. Sachi harvested 28 stalks, each one worth a fortune. From deeper in came a soft, wet sound that was not water. The armored turtles were the size of small carts. 4 of them, slow and armored, grazing on light moss that grew on the ore seams. Their shells glinted with embedded metal. The leader's shell had a sheen the others did not. The deep, cool gleam that Mariusz told her, very quietly, was orichalcum. He used a sleep bomb. The turtles went down. She was afraid of the dark further in the cave, and he took her hand without comment, and she did not let herself think about it for longer than a breath. They collected the leader's shell in pieces. They walked out. The sun was finishing the horizon when they reached camp. She used bone cutting to separate the shell along its seams. A turtle shell, as Mariusz told her, is built from ribs, and bone cutting was the right tool, and the pieces laid out on their blanket looked like pieces of the sea in evening light. They ate turtle meat hot pot with the last of their vegetables. They watched the stars come out again. She thanked Pichon for the cave. She thanked Mariusz for the trip. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said her name once, out loud, testing the shape of it the way he had the first time, and it sounded different in the dark. They made the capital on the third morning. They cleared the quest at the counter, 14 gold, her share of the haul, and An hugged her so hard she thought her ribs would bruise. She teased her, loudly, about whether anything had happened in the mountains. Sachi told her no. Anne did not believe her. She laughed so hard she cried. Mariots took her to the blacksmith counter that afternoon. The blacksmith was a dwarf named Gondo, with an iron-gray beard in 2 braids and a voice like a dropped hammer. He took one look at Sachi's hands and said, without asking her name, that he would make her knife. He asked if she had the material. She put the orichalcum fragments on his counter. He bowed. He told her to come back in 2 weeks. Mariots took her to a training field that evening and taught her to throw a knife. He was a strict teacher. He did not soften for her. She hated the training. She did not miss a single session for 14 days. Alfred, when she walked back into the dismantling room the morning after they returned, came at her across the floor and hugged her. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, and she understood that he had not slept well for 5 days. She tried to give him back the bracelet. He would not take it. He told her to keep it in case. She did not argue. Niall complained loudly that his workload had doubled in her absence. Roland, in the corner, smiled and said nothing. 2 weeks later, the knife was ready. Gondo presented it in a wooden box. The blade was pale, faintly iridescent, lighter than steel should be, perfectly balanced in her hand. He named his price at 8 gold, a number so absurdly low that she nearly asked him to let her pay more. He refused. He said the orichalcum had been hers to start with, and he only charged for his time. Mariots brought her 5 horn bulls that same afternoon for a first dismantle. She activated the skill. The knife caught the light in a way no one else in the room saw. Glowing lines traced along the bodies, a map she could follow without looking. She dismantled all 5 bulls in the time it took the others to clear their throats. The blade kept going. Before she could stop it, it finished dismantling the workbench underneath the bulls into a neat stack of lumber. The room went quiet. She had been waiting for that. Alfred ran in, appraised the knife, and announced, as calmly as a man trying not to shout, that the blade had 2 rare enchantments. It amplified the wielder's ability and doubled all experience gained. She leveled to 6 the next week, with a new skill waiting at the ceiling of it, bloodletting. She tested it on a 7-colored bird at the counter. A light tap, a whispered word. No blood followed the cut. The voice in her head said, at the molecular level. Doldo's laugh rattled the ceiling. "All right, Sachi," he said, still laughing. "I had told myself you wouldn't surprise me again. I was wrong." Pichon was bigger than she had been 2 months ago. Sachi had noticed without admitting it. The little dragon had eaten more than was reasonable, and she no longer fit comfortably in her basket. Alfred, who had started hand-feeding her, told Sachi gently that pixie dragons grew into their full power eventually and left their bondmates when they did. Sachi hugged her very hard that night. She told her they had now, and now was enough. The guild threw a quiet celebration for her level up the next evening. Wine went around. Doldo told the story of the workbench to everyone willing to listen. Mariots leaned against the wall the way he did now, present, unspeaking, watching her across the room, and she was laughing at something Niall had said when the door of the guild hall opened, and the noise of the room dropped in a way she had learned to recognize. A man in the uniform of the Salvatos kingdom, gold braid, white sash, the crest of a country whose throne room she had sworn she would never walk into again, stepped into the hall. He bowed. He unrolled a scroll. He said her name out loud to the ceiling. He said the king of Salvatos was formally requesting her. The scroll said her name out loud to a room full of her friends. The envoy was a dark-haired man named Ned, his uniform stiff with gold braid, his voice careful enough to sound rehearsed. He apologized for interrupting. He apologized a second time for being blunt. He said that the neighboring kingdom of Salvatoros was in the middle of a monster crisis, a slow stampede that had been building since the end of summer, and their dismantling counters were collapsing under the weight. They had heard of a dismantler in Doran called the Godspeed Girl. They were, with all formality, requesting her. Sachi thought about the throne room she had been left alone in. She thought about the girl who had called her an aunt. She thought about a village somewhere whose monsters were eating its fields right now. She told Ned she would come. Alfred stood up so fast his chair squeaked. He tried to offer himself as escort. Mariots, leaning against the pillar he had leaned against for the last hour, said flatly that he would go. He did not say it loudly. He said it once, and the room adjusted around it the way a room adjusts around a load-bearing wall, and said, calmly, as if announcing the weather, "Oh, yeah, my dad's coming back in a few days, so it's probably fine for Alfred to go too." The whole celebration went still. Alfred turned toward her very slowly. Sachi turned toward her even more slowly and blinked at them. "I didn't tell you," she said. "My dad is the guildmaster, Owen. He sends a messenger eagle every week." Mariots made a sound Sachi had never heard him make before. Doldo put his face in his hands and laughed for a solid minute. Alfred looked as if someone had rearranged the furniture of his life without telling him. Ned, who did not know what was happening, unrolled a second scroll from the Salvatos Guildmaster with a royal seal on it and handed it to Alfred to read. Alfred read it. Ned said he would wait for their signal, handed Alfred a small communication stone, and teleported out with his soldiers in a polite flash of blue light. Later, after the celebration had calmed into the low hum of a guild that is trying to pretend nothing strange happened, Ned's letter got passed around, and Doldo, who knew things the rest of them did not, slid a casual sentence across the table that rearranged Sachi's day a second time. Alfred here used to be A rank. Alfred did not deny it. He adjusted his glasses and said, with the lonely smile she was beginning to recognize, that it was an old story now, and he was just a humble submaster. She sat there looking at him the way you look at a person whose house you have lived in for months, without noticing the second floor. Owen came back 3 days later. He came back in the middle of her lunch. He was the size of 2 of Doldo stacked on top of each other. Chestnut hair shot through with gray, arms webbed with old scars. He walked into the guild with Anne's eyes and a voice that rattled the cutlery, and the first thing he did was cross the room and hug his daughter until her feet came off the floor. The second thing he did was turn around, look at Sachi, and ask, very loudly, if she was the one who had shut down a stampede with a dismantling knife. He had her demonstrate the next morning. He watched her dismantle a cockatrice, a hornbull, a black spider, and 5 horned rabbits in one pass of her ability, and he laughed in a way that shook the ceiling. Then, he took Alfred and Doldo into a side room and closed the door. They came out an hour later with 3 conditions. She was to be registered formally as an adventurer, Owen's idea, so her status would travel with her across the border. She was to hide the full shape of her power from foreign eyes. Ability, yes, but not extent, and Alfred was to come with her. Alfred was not a request, he was a guarantee. She filled out the registration form that afternoon. She wrote her hometown as Saradin. She did not hesitate. The teleport was not what she had expected. It was not unpleasant. It was a cold second that felt like the whole of her folding forward through a door that had been there all along. And then, the air of a different country was in her lungs. She had held Marriott's hand in her right and Alfred's in her left for the jump, because she had said, honestly, that she was scared, and neither of them had been able to think of a reason not to. They had argued about whose hand it should be the whole way over. Peachon, tail twitching, made a very rude sound at both of them when they landed and pecked at their fingers until they let go. The Salvatos guild master was a dwarf named Mimi, with the face of a 10-year-old, the voice of an 80-year-old, and a stack of books taller than she was. She welcomed them with a string of old-fashioned endearments and led them to a private warehouse that had been cleared for Sachi. Alfred reminded her with diplomatic firmness of Owen's second condition. Mimi nodded. The warehouse door closed behind Sachi and Marriott's with a heavy wooden bar. The backlog was higher than any stampede pile she had ever seen. Marriott's and Peachon helped. He hauled the large bodies into working position. She ate the scraps, and she worked through it the way she had worked through the rush, knife glowing, lines on the corpses only she could see. In 3 hours, they had cleared a third of the pile. Mimi came in to check on them at the end of hour 4, took one look at the difference in the room, and stood very still for a long time with her small mouth open. Alfred intercepted a tactful question before she could finish asking it. Sachi was to be lodged in the royal castle. Hospitality, they called it. Her room had a canopy bed and carpets soft enough to swallow sound. She stood in the doorway with Peachon on her shoulder and a dismantler's bag at her feet, and she tried to reconcile the room with the person standing in it. She could not. She took a bath. She slept. The audience was the next evening. She went in her work clothes. She did not own anything better, and she was not about to borrow something that belonged to anyone in that castle. Marriott's wore his usual dark adventurer's gear and did not bow. Alfred and Marriott's spent the walk to the throne room arguing over who would step in front of her if something went wrong, and Mimi ended it by telling them both to flank her and stop being a nuisance. The king of Salvatos had silver white hair and a beard to match, and a voice that apologized before it commanded. His name was Salman. He acknowledged her work, thanked her, said formal courtesies were not required, and got directly to the point. The monsters were abnormal in both number and behavior, and he was asking Marriott's to help investigate. Marriott said, depending on the situation, in the shortest possible version of a yes he could have offered. The queen, pink blonde, a small fan in her hand, smiled softly. Prince Henry, the older of the 2 royal siblings, blonde and handsome, in a way that made Sachi's skin tighten for no reason, waved at her as if they had met before. They had not. They were preparing to leave when the princess stood up. Her name was Lilywell, and she was 18, and she scanned Sachi the way a noblewoman scans the cut of a dress she is not going to buy. Her eyes moved on to Marriotte's and stopped there. She said, out loud, in front of her parents and 4 ambassadors and Sachi, that she liked that one. She told Marriotte's to become hers. The throne room went quiet. The king's voice went sharp. He told his daughter to sit down. The queen's fan stopped moving. Marriotte's turned just enough for the amethyst of his eyes to catch the light, and he told the princess, flat, clear, unhurried, that he would not belong to her. He did not raise his voice. He did not bow. He walked past the royal family and past the ambassadors and past Sachi, and he held the door open on his way out. She followed him. Alfred followed her. Mimi followed Alfred. The throne room was still quiet when the doors closed behind them. A maid brought dinner to her room that night, and her hands shook when she set it down. She ate it anyway. She had been too angry to notice she was hungry, and angry was a version of herself she did not see often enough to waste. 5 days passed. The warehouse pile shrank. She fell into a rhythm. Dismantle, eat, sleep. Try not to look at the hallways on the way back from the counter. Pichon grew used to the castle. Alfred grew tighter in the shoulders every hour. On the 6th afternoon, Prince Henry walked into her warehouse. He was not supposed to. Mimi's protocol forbade it. He came in anyway, laughing as if the rule were a joke he was telling, and he dropped a sealed envelope on her counter with his sister's seal on it. The letter was addressed to Marriotte's. Marriotte's, standing against the wall where he always stood, unfolded it and read it in under 5 seconds. He crushed it in his hand without breaking eye contact with Henry, let the paper fall to the warehouse floor, and walked out of the room. Mimi's twin pigtails lifted from her shoulders, despite there being no wind in the warehouse, and she ordered Henry out. He left. On the way past Sachi's counter, he leaned close enough that she felt the heat of his breath at her ear. I will come and see you again, he said, softly, as if he were doing her a favor. She did not say anything. She did not move. She had her knife in her hand, and she waited until the door closed behind him before she let her breath back out. Mimi looked at her. Alfred looked at her. She pretended her hands were steady. A messenger ran in a minute later, shouting for Mimi to come to the conference room immediately. Plant-type monsters had been reported in a southern forest near the border, swarming in numbers that did not match the usual ecology. Mimi dragged her along, rather than leave her in a room Henry could walk back into. She sat at the edge of the conference room and listened to ice gift strategies she did not need to understand. Somewhere in the middle of a phrase about containment, she remembered, abruptly, the way you remember a detail about a dream, that she had been finding small, dark seeds in the stomachs of monsters for 2 weeks. She had thought they were cysts. She had thought they were debris. She had thought they were nothing. She raised her hand. She told the room. Alfred grabbed her wrist, eyes wide behind his glasses, and pulled her out of the room at a run. Back at the warehouse, he had Ned bring 15 blackhorns from the dismantling counter. She bled them with bloodletting and cut their stomachs open with her knife one at a time. The 15th made her stop breathing. They all had the same seed, dark, dry, the shape of a lentil and the color of dried blood. 2 of them had begun to sprout. They brought the seeds back to the conference room. The table went silent. One of the sprouted seeds, exposed to the light, snapped a vine upward toward the nearest adventurer. Mimi's hand came down across it in one clean chop before it reached him. Alfred apologized to her 3 times for being so excited that he had grabbed her wrist, which she had not noticed in the slightest. She was thinking, with the flat, clear efficiency she had used in her corporate job, about the 1,000 monsters currently moving through a forest to the south, and about what was inside all of them. From a balcony at the far end of the room, she noticed, because she was trying not to notice anything inside the room itself, a figure in a dark cloak had been watching them. She could not see his face. She could only see that he was watching, and that he had been watching for longer than she had been in the room. When she looked up again, he was gone. Henry came back 3 days later. He did not walk into the warehouse this time. He waited in a corridor outside the cafeteria, and when Sachi walked past him alone, Alfred, deep in his seed research, Marriotte's gone to the hour Lilywell had blackmailed out of his schedule. The prince's hand came down around her wrist, and he told her, smiling, that he was catching her. He was larger than she was. He was stronger than she was. She opened her mouth to call for Mimi, and he pulled, once, and she understood, in the second before her feet followed him, that calling was going to be worse than going. He took her into the city. He bought her kraken tempura. He told her that he knew she had been summoned by accident, that he knew the throne room in the other kingdom had thrown her away, and that he was, in his own words, and the way he said it she would remember, just interested. He told her his mother had died when he was small, and the current queen was his stepmother. stepmother. He told her his sister was not above sending poisoned herbs or hired knives after a servant girl. He said he was telling her this to keep her safe. He said a lot of things. None of it mattered. The heat of his palm on her wrist was burning through the leather band Alfred had given her, and underneath the leather, the silver clasp was hot against her skin, and she felt the bracelet's enchantment strain and hold against a grip that should have broken the bone. He walked her back to the warehouse. He apologized when Alfred ran out to them for holding a little too tightly. He leaned in on his way out and whispered in the cheerful voice of a man ordering dinner that they should go out again. Alfred's face when he saw the bracelet went empty. Marriott's face when he saw the bracelet went past empty into a place she had not been aware faces could go. Marriott's pulled her behind him. He did not speak. He watched Henry walk away down the corridor, and when the door closed, he turned back and took her arm as gently as a man who has learned to be careful with broken glass. He rolled back the leather and looked at the bruise underneath and said one sentence, quietly, so that only she could hear it. He will not do that again. Mimi took her to the infirmary. The healer closed the bruise in 30 seconds. She did not take the bracelet off. She had not taken it off since. Lilywell summoned Marriott's for the second time that same evening. He told Sachi later what Lilywell had said to him, with wine in his hand, sitting on the edge of her bed. She had told him, as if she were discussing the weather, that if he did not attend her daily noon lunches, she could not guarantee Sachi's safety. There were herbs that attracted monsters, she said, and assassins were cheaper than people knew. He had told her flatly that if a single one of those things reached Sachi, he would stand in her mother's throne room in a week and explain to her father what his daughter had done. He had stood against the wall of her room for 2 hours after that, refusing to sit at the table with her until his scheduled hour ran out. He came to Sachi's door straight from there. He sat down on the edge of the bed and leaned the whole weight of his head against her shoulder, the way a tired child leans against a parent, and neither of them moved for a minute. She brought out a bottle of radishberry wine An had pressed into her pack before they left. She poured 2 cups. They drank. He ate a piece of bread she did not remember putting on the plate. He said, without looking at her, "I think you are cute." He said it flat, a statement, not a line. "I think you are cute." His ears were red. Her face was warm. Pichon was asleep between them on the coverlet, and she heard her own voice, quiet, telling him that she was comfortable next to him, and he answered that he would say the cute thing every time they met now, on principle. She told him he could not. He said he could. He lifted her chin with one finger until she was forced to look at him, and the amethyst of his eyes in the candlelight was close enough that she stopped breathing for a second. And Pichon, who had not been asleep after all, jumped between them and chirped in his face until he laughed. He laughed. She had never heard him laugh. They stayed up too late. He told her, without saying it directly, that ability level 10 was the ceiling, but experience did not stop there, that new skills could awaken in crisis or against monsters beyond your range. She asked about the life he had lived. He told her, quietly, one more sentence than he had told her at the campfire on the mountain. He stopped again. She did not push. He left her room at the edge of the morning. She slept 4 hours. She went to work. Her ability leveled to 7 at the counter that afternoon, with a new skill called Grant, sitting at the top of it that Alfred could not fully read. He scribbled notes. Marriott's paced the warehouse perimeter, watching for a prince who did not come back that day. She was dismantling a horned boar when the worker next to her mishandled a broken horn and cut his own arm open, deep. The blood came out fast, pooled on the floor between them, and Alfred, who had been mid-sentence about the new skill, went down like someone had cut his strings. Marriott's caught him. They brought him into the side room, laid him on the couch. A healer sealed the worker's arm. Sachi sat on the floor beside Alfred and held his hand until his breath came back even. He apologized for the feint. He apologized for the apology. He told her, very quietly, that he could not be around human blood. She already knew. She had known since the horn rabbit on her first day and the pixie dragon on her 50th. She asked him because she had decided not to sit at the edge of someone else's wound any longer, if he would tell her why. He looked at Marriott's. Marriott's handed him a cup of water. Alfred drank it. Then he told the whole of it. He had been 28. His party of 4 had been A rank. A village between Duran and Salvatos had reported 1 B rank monster sighted. They had run through the forest for 2 nights to reach the village. They found the village already dead. One girl had survived, mud-smeared, hiding behind cut logs at the edge of the square. The single B rank had been 5 wyverns. Their scout had panicked and run and been taken by the first wyvern before Alfred had closed his mouth on the order to stay. Their support mage had fired a distress flare and in doing so had painted a target on her own back. She had died when the second wyvern took her midair. The remaining 2 of his party both older than him, both with families, had charged forward to put their bodies between the girl and the third and fourth wyverns, and had died where they stood to buy her 4 seconds. Alfred had killed all 5 wyverns. He had come out of the frenzy with blood to his elbows, standing over a pile of parts, the surviving girl staring at him from behind the logs with her hands pressed to her mouth. She had taken one look at him, not at the dead wyverns, not at her rescued body, but at him, and she had recoiled. She had seen the man who had saved her life, and the look on her face had said, "Monster." He had collapsed. A second adventurer team had found the smoke signal, arrived, gathered the wreckage. The girl had been taken to a hospital in the capital. Alfred had been in the infirmary for weeks. By the time he had been well enough to stand, the girl had been released, taken away by a family he had never been able to track down, and he had never seen her face again, except in the way it had looked at him in the square. He had never been able to stand the sight of human blood since. Owen had offered him a job at the guild the month he left his adventuring papers at the door. Appraisal was Alfred's blessing. Paperwork, he said, did not bleed. He had risen to submaster. He had taken in one summoned girl who had arrived in a throne room and been abandoned, because he had known, the moment he saw her, that he could not afford to fail another girl the same way. He finished the story staring at the wall. Mariutz spoke first. He said, in that flat, matter-of-fact voice he used for the hardest sentences, that danger was part of being an adventurer, that it was not Alfred's responsibility, that the party had chosen the 4 seconds because the girl had been worth them. Sachi said, after she had the breath to say it, that 2 men had stood between a child and a wyvern so that she could grow up, that they had resolve, that they had pride, that the girl had lived because of Alfred, not in spite of him. Alfred cried once and then stopped and wiped his glasses. He asked if he could go back to the village. He asked if he could at least mourn them. Mariutz said, such a thing is not even a request. Sachi said the same in other words and reached into her pocket and told him that they would go with him the week after the mission was done. He nodded. He held her hand a minute longer than he usually did. He smiled the lonely smile with a different edge on it, the edge of a man who has finally been given permission to grieve. They sat in the side room together, the 3 of them, until the lamp outside the window went pale, and someone down the corridor called that a new wave of monsters had been reported at the border. Alfred named the thing in the forest 2 days after he told them his wyvern story. The scrolls he had been buried in since their arrival had a word in them, Raferedia, an ancient parasitic flower, thought extinct, capable of drawing every monster in a day's march toward it with a scent and a fruit. The fruit carried seeds. The seeds rode in the stomachs of monsters until the host matured. The host was a monster too large for the forest it grew in. If the Raferedia reached full size, the monster inside it would too. They met in Mimi's office. Mimi, Ned, Alfred, Mariutz, Sachi, Pichon, asleep on her lap. The map had a red circle on the southern forest. Ice Gift adventurers had been gathered already. Mimi looked at Mariutz. Mariutz looked at the map. He asked for rosters and routes. He said yes. A vanguard of 12 left the next morning. Jade, the guild's youngest teleporter, ash-gray hair and dark circles under his eyes, sent them through. Prince Henry came through the guild that morning to give a public speech to the vanguard and a quieter warning to Sachi. Watch for my sister. She did not thank him. She watched him leave. Lilywell was, at that same hour, giving private instructions in her chambers to a knight who came out pale enough that the maid pouring her tea almost dropped the kettle. Jade came back the next day with a slash across his chest and a message that could not wait. The vanguard had cleared the outer plant monsters and reached the Raferedia. The Raferedia had been waiting for them. They were cut off. 2 dead already, the rest pinned down. A support team of 8 was rushed together. Mariutz was on it. Sachi was not. Alfred was not. They went to the warehouse to gather medical supplies, and Mariutz caught her hand and buckled the small knife belt around her waist without asking. You wear this, he said, whether you come or not. Pichon, perched on her shoulder, made the noise she makes when she is going to disobey someone. The support team stood in a circle in the lounge. Jade raised his hands. He hesitated. His eyes flicked sideways, just once, the way a man's eyes flick when he's about to do something he cannot undo. And then he spoke the word, and the blue of his transfer magic closed around all of them. When it opened, they were not in the lounge. They were in a forest. The noise of combat was close. Alfred was beside her. She was beside Alfred. Jade was on his knees, apologizing in a voice that was a single word repeated until it broke. They had not been on the roster. They had been dragged in as bait. Mariutz's face, when he put that together, did not change. He looked at Jade. He said, quietly, that Jade would answer for it later. Then, he took hold of the situation the way an S-rank adventurer takes hold of a situation. Terse orders, rear support assignment for Alfred and Sachi. Blades up, forward. She thought of Lilywell in her pink dress, in a room in the castle, drinking tea. She thought of the knight who had left her room pale. She understood. She walked forward. The battlefield was a clearing around a spring. 3 flower offspring with vines as thick as her forearm. 5 poison grizzlies. The original vanguard on the ground, bleeding, choking on the paralytic sap. Above it all, at the center of the clearing, the Raferedia itself, the size of a carriage, flowering, beautiful in the wrong way. A thing can be beautiful. Mariusz had an ice-gift adventurer freeze his blade. He went to the flower wall. He cut through it. The support team rushed the wounded. Alfred and Sachi worked the rear. Antidote vials, compresses, bone setting. Pichon wrapped a pale, shimmering barrier around them and the wounded, wide enough for Alfred to step out through it when he chose. The first poison grizzly came down under a spinning axe. Alfred threw through the barrier's edge, in a motion she had not known he knew. He gave orders to the grizzly-facing adventurers that sounded like a man who had once led A-rank parties. They obeyed. Mariusz cut the giant Raferedia's vines, and the vines regrew, and he cut them again. Alfred shouted the weakness, a bulge above the calyx. Mariusz froze the plant where it stood and drove the blade into the bulge. The Raferedia died. Something under the soil where it had been cracked open. A hole opened. A manticore climbed out. It was the size of a draft horse. It roared. The sound knocked 2 of the ice gifts off their feet. A 6th poison grizzly came through the tree line while they were still trying to remember how to breathe. It went for Alfred. Alfred, the man who had just killed a grizzly and orchestrated a rescue, moved to put his body between the animal and the wounded. The claw grazed him across the forearm. He looked down. His skin began to turn purple. Sachi felt the old heat again. She had felt it once, on a counter in Duran, with a salamander's claw coming for her throat. She had felt it at the base of her hand every time she used her skill. She felt it now, and this time, it had a decision attached to it. She said the words out loud for Alfred to hear, even if nobody else did. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't think I can keep the promise." She broke it. The first poison grizzly she was closest to roared, and she walked toward it, orichalcum knife pulsing in her grip, and she activated Dismantle on a living B-rank monster in front of every adventurer on that field. The glowing lines appeared. The animal came apart. It was a body on the ground before it finished its lunge. The second grizzly, the 6th one, the one that had just poisoned Alfred, wheeled away and charged her directly. She did not have time to reach it. She reached for a small knife at the belt Mariusz had buckled on her. She put her Dismantle Reproduction on it. Imbued. The system called it, the word arriving in her head at the same moment the knowledge did, and she threw. The knife opened the grizzly from muzzle to tail, as cleanly as a practiced cook opens a fish. She was already running toward Alfred. His arm had gone the color of a bruise 3 days old. She wished for a skill she did not have. She wished so hard it arrived. Detox. The voice in her head announced calmly, and she laid both hands on Alfred's purple arm, and she watched the color withdraw. He looked at her. She had been crying the whole time without noticing. He said, very quietly, the same thing he had always said when someone tried to put his weight down for him. "I did it of my own will. Please don't feel responsible." He did not hear her apologize again. The other adventurers were already moving them backward into the barrier. Pichon's light closed around them. They watched Mariusz fight the manticore. He fought it alone. He called a skill she had not heard him name before, rumination, hellfire, and the blade he was holding turned the color of an inside of a furnace. The manticore lunged. He sidestepped the wing and took the throat in a single rising cut that did not stop until it was out the other side. He decapitated it. The ground shook when the body hit. He turned and looked across the clearing at her and beckoned once with 2 fingers. Alfred came with her because he was the one allowed. She knelt beside the carcass. She ran, Dismantle, through it while the field watched. The knife traced glowing lines nobody else could see. The manticore came apart in pieces large enough to require 2 men to move. The voice in her head told her, flatly, that her ability had reached level 8. She did not look up. Jade brought them back to the guild in shifts. He had teleported through his own wound to get them out. The healer had to hold him conscious afterward. Mimi was waiting at the gate. Prince Henry came running across the courtyard, still in his riding boots. He turned on Jade and then, when he saw Jade's face, turned on the sister who had put the order in Jade's hand. He left. He came back an hour later with Lilywell under guard and a maid beside him, a small nervous woman who had heard every word of the tea scene, and he put the whole story in front of Mimi and the king. The queen, he said later, quietly, privately, in a room with only them in it, had given her daughter the idea in the first place. Lilywell was taken. She would be sent to a northern monastery. She was to heal the sick until her healing skill reached level 10. At the rate she worked, that would take most of a lifetime. The queen was confined to a tower. Henry would be named Crown Prince. A gag order was placed on Sachi's ability for the remainder of their stay, not to punish her, Mimi said, but to buy them the time to leave before the wrong sort of neighbor heard. She nodded. She was too tired to argue. She walked to a bath and sat in it until the water went cold. Alone in the bath, she discovered that her skill had quietly learned a new trick. The miasma that had clung to her knife blade all evening, she had set the knife on the tub's edge, was thinning as she watched it. The voice in her head said, "Purification," in the same calm tone it used for everything. She did not tell anyone that night. She wanted to hold it in her 2 hands first, to know what it was. 5 days later, the royal family threw them a thank you party. She wore a royal blue dress the maids had picked. Her hair was put up with a silver pin. Mariutz came in a navy tuxedo and did not bow to the king. The king, visibly tired in a way she recognized as the exhaustion of a parent who had just lost 2 family members at once, thanked each of them, gave them pendants bearing the royal crest, called them passes of friendship. Alfred came through the ballroom doors in a silver-gray tuxedo with his glasses off and his emerald eyes uncovered. The royal healer had restored his sight for the evening, and for the space of 3 seconds, she did not recognize him. He bowed. He asked her to dance. He told her, softly, as they turned through the crowd, that he had been jealous at the victory party in Doran. Then he smiled the lonely smile and said, with some difficulty, "But I am happy for you." Prince Henry pulled them aside at the end of the evening. He told them the verdicts on his sister and mother. He thanked them without flattery. Then he opened a side door and brought in a maid. She was Sachi's age, small, hands shaking. She looked at Alfred with her whole face. "Long time no see," she said. It was Sayaka. She had been adopted by an orphanage in this kingdom and taken in as a maid at the castle. She had been in this building the entire 10 days they had been in it. She apologized for the look on her face the day of the wyverns. She apologized for every night she had not been able to find him again. She cried. Alfred did not cry. He smiled, not the lonely smile, the other one, and he told her, with a gentleness Sachi would remember for years, that there was nothing to apologize for, that he was glad she had lived, that he had been waiting a long time to be glad. They went home the next morning. Jade teleported them with a detour. The village where Alfred had lost his party was now a grass-covered field. Stone markers, rough, set by some local adventurer after the event. Alfred knelt at each stone. He said the names. He stayed a long time at 3 of them. Mariutz and Sachi stood at a respectful distance. The wind was warm. Then Jade sent them home. Anne was waiting in the guild square when they landed. She ran. She hit Sachi with the full weight of a person who had worried for 20 days, and she buried her face in her shoulder, and she whispered, because she had to, because it was Anne, that she wanted to hear every bit of the love story as soon as the dust settled. Sachi held on to her without answering. She had come home. She had not known, until that second, that the word home was a place she owned now. Winter settled over the capital the way only quiet things do, slowly and without asking permission. Pichon began training with a retired A-rank adventurer named Zanja, whose injured leg kept him at the guild most afternoons, and whose patience was the only currency he still had in abundance. She had learned on the Raferedia battlefield that her barrier could hold. What she learned in the guild basement over the next 3 weeks was that she could let arrows and axes pass outward through it without breaking it inward. She came back to Sachi's cot at night, smug in the particular way a small dragon is smug when it has acquired a new trick it has decided is a secret, and dragged Sachi to the New Year festival. Red and purple lanterns again, the same festival colors as the harvest, only colder. Sachi bought a pendant from a stall, a communication blessing pendant, 2 halves of a pair, meant for long-distance conversation, and tucked 1 half into her coat, and disappeared for the countdown because she ran into Niall with his younger siblings and could not extract herself. Mariutz found Sachi in the crowd before the first firework. "As I thought," he said behind her. "It's Sachi." She asked how he had known she would be there. He told her, flatly, that he could find her from across a country. Then his ears went red, and he said, because he had run out of other things to say, that she should not put the sentence into words. Fireworks opened above them. He took something out of his coat and handed it to her, a hair ornament, silver with a pale sapphire in the center, the shape of a small winter flower. "It suits you," he said, and he said it in the same flat-fact voice he had used for, "I think you are cute," and her face was warm for reasons that had nothing to do with the sparklers. Anne came back, saw the ornament, and teased her about it for the rest of the walk home. There was a festival in this country she had never heard of called Love and Gratitude Day. You gave small gifts to the people you were grateful to, and you told them so, and told her about it on the first day of spring. She prepared invitations for 6 people. She made dinner for all of them the night before the day itself. 6 courses, the ones she had been too tired to cook in her old life. And they sat at her little table in shifts and ate until the guild cook came by curious, and Doldo had to tell him to go back. Mariutz ate 2 servings of everything and did not speak. He asked her at the door when the others had gone if she would spend the next day with him. She went. They walked through the capital, through shops she had not been to, a district with a river she had not seen, and he took her into a pharmacy and introduced her to a woman named Layla. Layla was tall and green-haired and unhurried. She had been a C-rank adventurer before she had become a pharmacist. The lantern grass they had brought back from the mountain mine the previous year had been grinding into her fatigue medicines for months. She thanked Sachi for that, and she looked at Mariutz in the way a good friend of long standing looks at a man whose choices have finally begun to make sense. And she invited Sachi to come help her on a herb quest to Rana Forest on a day she did not yet have plans for. Mariutz took her to dinner that evening at a restaurant that had been old when his grandparents were young. Over the food, she felt the small, mean twist of jealousy about Layla she would rather not have felt, and he noticed it. And he said, as if reading a report again, that he had asked her to spend the day with him because he had wanted to spend the day with her. Not because the pharmacy had needed a visit, not because the restaurant had had an opening, because it was you. She was flustered for the rest of the walk to the guild door. Anne was waiting in the hall, saw her face, and laughed so loudly that Doldo came out to see what was funny. She went with Layla to Rana Forest a week later. They used smoke bombs to avoid anything bigger than they could handle. Sachi dismantled a grass sheep for its horn, the base of Layla's fatigue medicine, and a few other small things along the way. Halfway through the afternoon, an earthquake went through the forest, and they found out the cause of it 2 minutes later when a C-rank minotaur came crashing through the underbrush from another containment field, wounded, furious, and directly on top of them. She put Pichon's barrier around Layla. She drew her orichalcum knife. Layla asked her if she was sure. She said yes. The Minotaur and she had a conversation of about 4 seconds that ended with it in 11 clean pieces on the forest floor. She twisted her ankle dismounting a broken log on the way out. Alfred and Mariutz were running up the forest path when they met them. Mariutz had been patrolling at the city gate because, he said later, he had felt she was in trouble and had stopped waiting for permission to care about it. Alfred, who had heard there was a Minotaur loose in the same forest, reached her first and carried her the rest of the way out because her ankle was twisted and because he had decided he was going to be the one to carry her, and neither Mariutz nor Sachi argued. Layla watched the whole thing with the quiet pleasure of a woman assembling the last 3 puzzle pieces of a friend's life. It was Anne who dragged her into the haunted house a week after the Minotaur. She had seen what she called a will-o'-the-wisp near an empty house on the west side of the capital, and she needed a second opinion. Sachi did not want to give one. She realized to her private horror, spent 22 years of her life terrified of ghosts and had not told anyone. Doldo laughed at her. Alfred, it turned out, was also terrified of ghosts. They went anyway, the 4 of them, and, briefly, Mariutz, who had come along out of a mixture of curiosity and the now routine decision to not leave her in rooms she might not come out of. In the dark alley behind the house, a cold finger touched her cheek, and she screamed. The figure that came into the torchlight was smiling. It smiled like a person. Alfred and Sachi clung to Mariutz from both sides, and Mariutz, annoyed, patient, amethyst eyes sharp, identified the thing as a wreath, a soul bound to this world by regret. Physical attacks do nothing. Only magic-gift adventurers can handle them, and the usual handling is destruction, the soul erased. She stepped forward before her brain had agreed to it. She did not want it erased. She did not know why she did not want it erased. She only knew that the shape of something in that alley was the shape of something she recognized, the shape of her grandfather in the second to last month of his life, the shape of herself on the night of the alley in Tokyo, the shape of everyone who had stayed behind in a room too long. And she wished, with the same desperation she had wished detox on a poisoned arm, for a way to let the thing go. The voice in her head gave her a new skill, grudge release. Threads appeared in the air, glowing, fine, rooted in the wreath's chest and tied to nothing she could see. She drew the orichalcum knife and she cut them. The ghost, the spirit, Race, his name came to her in the moment the thread snapped, looked at her. He smiled the way a person smiles when he has finally been told it is all right to leave. Then he was gone. She stood in the alley afterwards. Alfred had a hand on her shoulder. Mariutz had not moved. Anne, who had not been scared of any of it, had started crying without knowing she was crying. They went back to the guild. Doldo poured them something strong. She slept at Anne's house that night because she did not trust her room not to have anything else in it, and because she wanted to be close to someone while she thought about the grandfather she had not, in her first 21 years, been able to say goodbye to. She fell asleep on Anne's couch with her hand on Pichon's back. The first gray of spring was in the windows when she woke up. The fish at lunch had been thinner for 3 weeks when Anne told Sachi about Roseman Lake. Roland and Sachi were sent in the end, a 3-day business trip to help the lake's dismantling counter work through the backlog. Roseman was a day north by carriage, the air there thinner and bright, the water wide and flat, and the color of polished pewter. The fishery chief was a man named Mick, weather-lined and gentle in a way she had not seen yet in this world. He walked them through the shipment hall and then, with his hands in his pockets, walked them past it to the disposal pit where half the catch of the last week was lined up, frozen for burning. Contaminated, he said. Miasma, a sea serpent, had been surfacing in the lake. The saintess from the hero party had been sent to purify the water, but his voice went a little unsteady. She had fallen ill during the purification and the work had stalled. The rest was waste. She looked at the pit. She thought of her grandfather, who would have cried standing where she was standing at the amount of food being thrown away. She told Mick to give her the miasma measuring device and to leave the rest to her. Roland, to his eternal credit, did not argue. He chiseled the ice open. She set the orichalcum knife against the first tainted body, and she whispered purification into the air over it, and she watched the black aura on the measuring device thin until it read clean. She dismantled the fish. She did it to the next one and the next. 1 in 10 were contaminated. She purified them all. She worked until the sun went down, and when she went back to the inn, she told Roland, quietly, that they would attribute the successful purification to the saintess. She did not explain why. She did not need to. On the stairs of the inn, she ran directly into her. She was Japanese. She had long, straight black hair and the kind of porcelain skin that was not meant for this world's weather. She was younger than Sachi had thought saintesses could be, and she was holding the banister with a hand that shook. Her name was Tanaka Ririka. She had been summoned here 6 years ago. She looked at Sachi, and her face went very pale, and then very stubbornly back to composed, and she asked her, in a voice that was almost a whisper, "Who are you?" She found out the next day why her hand had been shaking. Prince Brian of the hero party was with her on the walk down to the fishery. Sachi watched him. She watched her. Ririka collapsed in the street before they had made it halfway. Fever, lungs, a black aura spreading under her skin like ink through water, and Sachi caught her before Brian did. The prince looked down at her with the shocked helplessness of a man who had been standing next to her dying for weeks without noticing. She told him, with more heat than she had intended, that perhaps he should try paying attention. She picked Ririka up, and she carried her into the inn herself. She stayed with her. She kept her warm. She used purification on the black aura while she slept, slowly, thread by thread, because it was deep and it had set into her marrow. By the time the sun came through the curtain, the corruption was gone. She slept a clean sleep for the first time in a month. She woke up in the late afternoon. She looked at her arm. She looked at Sachi. She knew. Sachi did not deny it. She sat on the edge of her bed and poured her tea, and she told her the full shape of her last year. The alley in Tokyo, the presentation she had not finished, the throne room where Riri had called her an aunt, the old world life she had not cared to return to, the grandfather she had not been able to say goodbye to properly, the guild that had picked her up and fed her and given her Alfred and Anne and Pichon, and a dark-haired man whose name she could not say aloud yet. She told her because she was the first person she had met whose wound rhymed with hers. She did not leave anything out. Ririka cried at the end of it. She had not, she said, expected to meet anyone who would understand what it was like to be the one they had ordered. Sachi gave her one of the halves of her communication pendant. She told her she could press it whenever she needed to talk to someone on the other side of the ruler's table. She held it in her hand like a candle someone had left lit on her doorstep. Sachi confronted Prince Brian over breakfast. She told him that the woman he had been walking beside for months had been corroding from the inside, that saintesses summoned from other worlds are not tools, that the least he could do was see her. He heard her. He did not defend himself. He apologized, to her first in person, and then to Sachi, with his gloves off, in a low voice across the kitchen table. He said he had not asked questions he should have asked. He said he would ask them now. She accepted it because there was no advantage in holding a grudge against a man who was, she had decided, trying to be better. He took to calling her sensei, after that. Ririka laughed about it for the rest of the week. 3 days later, Ririka and Sachi walked the path along the lake on her last morning before she traveled back with Brian's party. She was teasing Sachi, sideways, gentle, the way friends tease, about who she might be thinking of so much that she kept looking at the horizon. The water to their left was calm. The water to their left was not calm for long. The sea serpent came out of the water without warning, bigger than the first one, twice the first one. Pichon was with Roland at the fishery. Sachi's knife was in her traveling bag in her room. She put her body between Ririka and the water. She had 5 seconds. She was not going to live 5 seconds. A blade flashed over her shoulder. The serpent's head came off and fell into the water on the far side of it like a dropped lantern. Mariusz was there. He was wearing the long cloak he wore when he had been riding for a full day. He had dust on his boots. He checked her for injuries with the flat of his hand against her cheek and asked in his matter-of-fact voice if she was safe. She said yes. Her heart was doing something her heart was not allowed to do. He had accepted a quest to investigate the lake 2 days earlier. He had been riding hard. He had not known she was here until he had felt she was in trouble. The distance sense again, named and unnamed across 2 phases of story, and he had put the spurs down. The serpent, he said, after Ririka had thanked him and then teased him too, had been the last one. The lake was clean. Ririka looked at Sachi sideways for the entire afternoon. She did not say what she was thinking out loud. She waited for the carriage. They left at dawn the next morning, Roland and Mariusz and Sachi in a carriage built for 2, with Pichon curled on Mariusz's lap because he had pointed at his lap and she had flown there. Ririka came out to say goodbye. She held up the pendant Sachi had given her, and she said, innocently, that she hoped Sachi had given the other one to someone she cared about. Sachi stuttered. Ririka grinned wider. She asked her, loud enough for Roland to hear, loud enough for Mariusz, who was pretending not to listen, to hear, if she was really not aware of it yet, Sachi? Sachi protested. She did not even know what it was. Then, with the carriage door closing and the driver calling the horses to walk, and Ririka still smiling at her from the street, her brain betrayed her. She closed her eyes, and the darkness behind them did not stay dark. It filled with dark blue hair tied loosely at the nape, amethyst eyes in candlelight, a broad back walking away from a dead serpent, a palm against her cheek, the shape of the man next to her, filling her whole head. Did I just... Her face was red before she understood why. Oh, she thought, quiet as a person sitting down on a step after a long walk. Oh no. She opened her eyes. Mariusz was looking at her. He asked her flatly what was wrong. She said nothing. Too fast. Roland, across from her, put his hand over his mouth and turned toward the window so neither of them would see him laugh. She kept glancing at Mariusz for the rest of the carriage ride. She could not stop glancing at him. Her heart would not settle. Pichon, on his lap, gave her the specific knowing look a dragon can give when the human she is bonded to has made a late discovery. Roland muttered at some point that he was going to have to sit in this carriage with the 2 of them being sweet and sour for an entire day. They came back into Saradin at dusk. She stepped down from the carriage, and her foot caught the edge of the running board, and she fell, not onto the ground, because Mariusz, who had already been getting down behind her, caught her around the waist with both hands and set her on her feet in a motion that was half practiced and half automatic. He looked at her. She could not look at him. She said thank you to the floor and walked into the guild with her face burning. An took one look at her in the hallway and knew. She dragged her into her office. She shut the door. She poured her tea. She sat her down. She said, all right, tell me. Sachi told her, all of it. The realization, the carriage, the stumble, the face, the small mean twist of jealousy about Layla months ago that she could now see for what it had been, the months of not knowing she was watching him. She listened. She did not tease her for a full minute, which was probably the kindest minute of her friendship so far. Then she grinned. She said, casually, that she had started dating Niall 3 weeks ago. She said she would tell her everything later. She said in the meantime, she was not, under any circumstances, allowed to avoid Mariusz because he would notice and it would be worse. Sachi promised. She slept 4 hours that night. She stared at the ceiling for the rest. The part of her that had been unchosen for 21 years was holding a piece of news it did not know what to do with. The part of her that was a cook wanted to make the man breakfast. The part of her that was a guild dismantler wanted to put on an apron and act normal. The part of her that her grandfather had told to find a good person was the quietest of all, and it was the one that finally rolled over at 3 in the morning and said into the pillow, All right. Then, mercifully, she fell asleep. She avoided him. She had promised Anne she would not, and she avoided him anyway. He brought monsters to her counter, and she dismantled them behind a carefully flat face. He asked, once, in the corridor outside the cafeteria, if he had done something to upset her. She said no. He did not believe her. He did not press. He went on a long quest the following week, and she was relieved and furious in the same breath. In the same way, you are relieved and furious when a person you love leaves before you have decided what to do about them. Winter turned to spring while he was gone. She dismantled things. She ate lunch. She held Peach on at night, and the little dragon made small worried sounds, and Sachi apologized to her for being a coward. Then, Layla's pharmacy had a boy in it. He was maybe 10. He was small for his age. He was buying medicine for his sick mother, with coins that were old country coins Sachi had not seen used in a year, and a charm against monsters with the rest of his coppers. Layla sold him both without a word, and watched him through the window. He lives outside the walls, she said, out where the roads do not go. When he left the shop, he did not go to any of the city gates that had guards. He went to the western gate that had been abandoned since the last expansion. Layla and Sachi went after him. By the time they reached the guild, Alfred had 3 adventurers already reporting that a magic wolf pack had been sighted at the tree line outside that same gate. She told Alfred about the boy. His face did what his face did when he was about to become A-rank Alfred again. He turned, and there was Marius standing in the hallway with road dust on his shoulders. Quest completed early. Blue-purple afternoon light across one half of his face. He looked at her. He said flatly, "I will come with you." She did not have time to avoid him. The forest was silent. Wrong silent. Peachan's scales came up. She flew ahead and came back and flew ahead again. And this time, the third flight ended at a small stone and thatch cabin in a clearing that was ringed at a specific and deliberate radius by the bodies of old forest things that had tried to get close and failed. The boy was inside. His name was Cain. His mother was, he told them in a voice that had not been used for anything happy in a long time, in a hospital in the capital. His father had been hurt by a wolf pack last winter because the wolves had come for Cain. Cain lived out here now. The grocer left bread and medicine at the tree line twice a week. The monsters were coming because of his heavenly gift. His gift was called Charm. It made wild animals want him. He had been 11 years old for 2 months of isolation. He told them all of this while a rustling started at the edge of the clearing and grew louder until Peachan put a shimmering barrier over the whole hut. Marius and Layla went out. They killed a lot of things. Alfred joined them with the axe throwing he had been pretending for a decade that he did not still have. Sachi sat inside the barrier with Cain. He asked her if she was from the same place he had heard the church talk about when his mother had last been well. The place where sometimes gifts were too strong. The place where they could be taken out. She had the answer written on the back of her hand by that point. She knelt in front of him so that their faces were the same height, and she asked him if he wanted her to do it. He cried. He asked quietly if it would hurt. She did not know. She said she would be careful. She wished for the skill. The voice in her head, calm as ever, gave it to her. Heaven's gift release. An application, a branch, a blade shape of grudge release. The difference was only intent. She saw the threads. They were not grief threads this time. They were the threads of a gift that had chosen to sit down in a child and grown too heavy for him to carry. She cut the one at the center. The rustling outside the barrier stopped. Cain put a hand to his chest and made a small, surprised sound. "It's gone," he whispered. "The thing I always felt. It's gone." Alfred came in, appraised him, confirmed it. The gift was gone. It could not be restored. She had taken a piece of the child he would have been and dismantled it so that the child he could be would not be eaten. She did not know how to feel about that. She did not have time. Cain's father met them at the door of a cottage near the capital an hour later, and he cried into his son's hair, and she realized that not knowing how to feel was a luxury. Marius, when the father finally let Cain go inside, took her by the wrist in the middle of the road. He had waited the whole afternoon for a private moment and had run out of patience. "Don't run," he said. "I only want to talk." She stopped. He did not say much. He asked her if she had been avoiding him because he had done something. She told him, for the first time in 3 weeks out loud to his face, that he had not, that it had been her, that she was not yet able to explain. He looked at her for a moment. Then he asked her if she would come out with him on the 10th of the next month, somewhere, just the two of them. She said yes before her brain had caught up to her mouth, which had become, she was beginning to accept, the way she said yes to him, and interrupted them at the guild door by pointing out they were blocking foot traffic. Marius let go of her wrist. She walked inside, feeling, for the first time in weeks, like a person who had met her own eyes in a mirror and not flinched. 2 mornings later, he did not come to the counter. Doldo found her at breakfast and told her, carefully, that Mariots had been found unconscious in the common cemetery at dawn. No visible injuries. Not responding. She ran. The infirmary had him on a narrow bed with his eyes closed and his hair over his cheekbone and the fresh blue of a mark she did not understand on the skin above his collarbone. A woman she had not seen before stood by the window. Her name was Violet. She had dark purple hair past her hips and red lipstick and eyes the color of the inside of a bruise, and she looked at Sachi the way a woman looks at a door she has just finished opening. She told them, without preamble, that Mariots had been marked by a dream eater, a monster that fed on regret. It was anchored somewhere. It was eating him in his sleep. Violet had a blessing of her own, record, a memory reader, and she offered, for their purpose only, to read his memories and find the anchor. Alfred asked, carefully, if it was ethical. Violet said, with a red smile, that ethics were for people whose friends were not dying. Alfred nodded. Violet put a hand on Mariots' forehead. The room went pale around Sachi. Her eyes closed, though she did not close them. She stood in someone else's past. She saw a boy of 15, thinner than the man she knew, still recognizably him, being dragged into a party of 4 adventurers by a loud older friend who kept calling him the sullen one. The older friend's name was Kurt. Kurt had a sunny face. Kurt had already decided to love the sullen boy before the sullen boy had decided whether to let him. There was a red-headed mage called Lielia and a dark-bearded warrior called Solid, and Kurt teased them as often as he teased Mariots, and the 4 of them, for a year, built the shape of a family around a boy who had never been in one. Kurt took Mariots into a shop in a town on the border one afternoon and bought a silver earring charm for Lielia. He was going to give it to her on her birthday the week after. He told Mariots, while paying for it, that Mariots was his friend. That was the word he used, my friend. Mariots, the boy in the flashback, the boy whose face she had been learning for a year, smiled. She had never seen him smile like that in the present. It was the smile of a person who had been handed something he had given up asking for. A week later, the party accepted a C-rank quest to deal with a pack of demon wolves menacing a merchant road. The fight went well, too well. A large alpha separated from the pack. Mariots, in the rush of it, chased. He was too deep into the woods before he felt the rope of the trap close around him. A Cerberus, A-rank, beyond their grade, came out of the trees. Kurt and Lielia and Solid ran the sound down to him. Kurt put himself between Mariots and the first of the 3 heads. The Cerberus went through him like a door. Mariots, the boy she was watching, the boy whose every breath she had begun to count as if it were her own, wished for speed with the desperation of a person who cannot lose what he is about to lose, and a word arrived in his head as simple and as cold as a blade. Flash. He took the creature apart in less than a second. He turned around. Kurt was on the grass. Kurt was looking up at him. Kurt was trying to say something. His mouth opened. The shape of the first word was an if. If we weren't in the same party as you, we wouldn't. And then his eyes lost the light that had been his particular light, and he never finished the sentence. Mariots knelt in the grass. He held his friend's hand until the warmth went out of it. Lielia, across the clearing, was holding a silver earring charm in her left fist and not crying. Solid stood with his sword still up. The 3 of them carried Kurt out of the woods together. Lielia and Solid retired within a month. Mariots stood at Kurt's grave in the capital cemetery a year after the death and made a vow to nobody that he would never be in a party again. He was 20 by then. He killed a dragon the next spring. He became the country's only S-rank adventurer the same week. He did not smile in public again, not once, for 5 years. The vision ended. She was on the floor of the infirmary. She had been crying the whole time. Violet, red lipstick unsmudged, looked at Alfred. She said quietly that Kurt's last word had never reached Mariots. That was the anchor of the Dream Eater. That was the regret. She complemented the memory record with her own magic, a thin red thread going into Mariots' sleeping form, and she stepped back. She looked at Sachi. She said that feelings should be put into words at the moment they occur to a person, and that with her skill, she could do the rest. Sachi stood up. She went to the dismantling counter, and she got her orichalcum knife. She came back. She held the knife over Mariots' sternum, and she whispered, grudge release, and the shape of a thread that had not been visible became visible, deep, black, pointing north, toward the common cemetery. Alfred took the position of the anchor and sent a runner, and a team went to dismantle the Dream Eater at its home. She did not go. She sat beside the bed, Peach-Han curled under her arm. She waited. She did not know how she entered the dream. She knew that she held the knife flat in her hand, and she wished the way she had wished for detox in a forest, and for grudge release in an alley, and for heaven's gift, release in front of a frightened child, and the door opened inside her. She stepped through it. She stood in a place that was white all the way to where the eye gave up. Mariusz was in the middle of it, curled small like a boy, and in front of him was a young man with a sunny face and an earring charm in his left hand. Kurt turned his head toward her. He smiled. He said, looking straight at Mariusz, "If we weren't in the same party as you, we wouldn't have lived as long as we did." Mariusz breathed in. The white went bright, and the bright went gentle, and then it went away. He woke at dusk. She was beside him. She had been crying without noticing. He looked at her. He said her name, the same way he had said it in a mine camp under a meteor, once, the shape of it testing the air for newness. And he reached out with a hand that had stopped shaking, and he put it on her chest over the place her heart was doing a thing it was not allowed to do, and he held it there. He said, "I had a long dream. It was a strange dream." He said, "While I was sleeping, for some reason, I really wanted to see you. You stayed. Thank you." She cried again. She had been crying all week. She did not care. She hugged him without asking permission. He held her until the healer came back into the room, and the healer, with the dignity of a professional, turned around and left. She did not see Alfred leave. Much later, she would learn he had been standing at the door the entire time. He had seen her enter the dream. He had seen the boy on the bed come back. He had listened to Mariusz thank the person Alfred had, for a year now, quietly loved. He had walked out of the infirmary without letting her know he had been there. He had gone to Doldo that night and said, once, in a low voice, that he was not going to tell Sachi what he had been feeling. He would carry it. He thought it would be better if she never had to. She would find out later, not from Alfred. Alfred kept his word. The phase closed on Mariusz's hand on her chest, and P-chan asleep on their feet, and a cemetery in the distance where the team Alfred had sent was dragging a dead Dream Eater into the daylight. Alfred asked Mariusz for a spar a week before the 10th. Sachi did not know why until later. She thought, at the time, that it was simply Alfred returning to his body. A-rank reflexes coming back online, the way a language comes back when you stop trying not to think in it. They fought in the training yard for most of a morning. Mariusz won. Alfred walked off the field with sweat in his hair and the kind of exhausted smile a person smiles when he has put something down that he has been carrying for a long time. It was only weeks later, and over tea, because An always knew, that she understood he had not been training. He had been saying goodbye, in the only language he had, to the idea of being the one she chose. She spent the 10th of the month panicking into her pendant. She was talking to Rurika long distance. Rurika was somewhere east, with the hero party, laughing at her. Sachi was holding a pale yellow dress up against her shoulders and asking her, for a 4th time, if the embroidery was too much. Prince Brian interrupted them to complain that Sachi's pendant was being used for fashion consulting and not for the miasma inquiry he was funding it with. Rurika told him to hush. She pinned the silver and sapphire hair ornament she only wore when going out with Mariusz into her hair, and she put on the dress, and she went downstairs. He was in the guild courtyard in a dark blue shirt and a vest she had never seen him wear. He held up 2 tickets. "The Royal Opera," he said, "if you are interested." She said yes the way she said yes to him now, a half second before her brain had decided to. They walked toward the opera house, through an afternoon busy with carts and children, and in a crowded intersection, he stopped and, without looking at her, held out his hand. She took it. He did not let go for the rest of the walk. She asked him, on the way, if he went to the opera often. He said, carefully, that it was his first time. He had asked around. She asked him why he had chosen today in particular. He thought about it for almost a block. Then, in the flat fact voice she had come to understand meant he was admitting something, he said, "Today is the day I was born." She stopped walking. She asked him why he had not told her. He said that spending time with her was enough. She said, in a voice that was hers and his and somewhere in between, that she did not agree. The opera was a love story between a younger prince and a farmer's daughter. The music was mostly strings. She cried in the 3rd act without asking herself permission. Mariusz did not take his eyes off her for the last 20 minutes of the show, and when they walked out into the evening, he held her hand again, and he took her up the long stone stairs of the clock tower observation deck, because, he said, the best view of the capital at sunset was from the top of it, and he wanted her to see it once. They reached the deck. The city was the color of a struck match. He turned to her. He asked, carefully, if she had a lover. She said, in the same voice and used to mock her for, "If I had a lover, I wouldn't be out with you like this." He did not laugh. He took a breath. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the Victory Party Hall a year ago, the look that had once been an ambush. "I am not kind to everyone," he said. "It's because it's Sachi that I want to do this. Sachi, will you be my place to return to?" She opened her mouth. A scream cut the sky open over their heads. It was the wrong shape of scream for a bird. It was the wrong shape of scream for anything she had ever heard. 3 silhouettes crossed the clock face behind Mariusz. and then 7, and then more than she could count. Griffins. A migration out of rhythm, a flock over the capital. Her answer did not get to leave her mouth. They ran. At the guild, the hall was already moving. Doldo in his battle apron, Mimi's pendant lit in Rurika's hand on the eastern road. Owen, with his greatsword pulled off the rack behind the reception desk, and Alfred was putting his coat on over his submaster uniform with the careful movements of a man who had just drawn a long weapon. Marriott said he would go to the south gate alone. He said, flat, that he had killed a dragon solo and he could kill a flock solo. Alfred told him, with equal flatness, that he was wrong. They argued for about 8 seconds. Then, a messenger ran in, saying griffins had landed outside the south gate already, and the gate was closed, and the townspeople had nowhere to go. Owen took his sword off his shoulder. Doldo picked up his cleaver. Sachi said, I am going. Marriott looked at her. He said, stay, and she said, no. And he said, Sachi, and she said, no. Alfred, whom she had expected to side with Marriott's, looked at her, and at Marriott's, and at her again, and he said quietly that he had a different task. He would run toward the archive for an old device. He said it to Marriott's, not to her. Marriott's did not argue this time. They went south. Pichon came with them. Her barrier was at full strength. The south gate was closed. Bodies of 3 city guards lay on the wall where they had fallen. 3 griffins were scratching the gate open like cats at a door. Marriott's killed the first one, the way he killed everything. Rising cut, no pause. Body on the ground before the third had registered the motion, and the other 2 came for him. He rose up against them, blade crackling with the electric light skill she had seen only once, on a manicore, a year ago. She climbed the gate tower. Owen shouted at her to get back. She told him, over her shoulder, that she was not standing behind Marriott's anymore. He laughed, a big shaking laugh, and hoisted his own sword onto his shoulder and followed. Marriott's looked up at her from the gate below. He said, loud enough for Owen to hear, in words she had not expected, I like you, Sachi. You are always facing forward, always giving everything, and you brighten the world I walk in. I will not die tonight. I will survive to hear your answer. Then he leaped off the wall and into the griffin below him before she could give it to him. Owen hauled her off the tower bodily, and they landed. He landed. She landed in his arms, in the street below. Doldo came up the stairs behind them, shouting about being too old for this. Pichon wrapped them in barrier. She drew the orichalcum knife, and she drew the 6 small knives from the belt Doldo had strapped to her on the way out of the guild, and she began to dismantle. The first griffin she dismantle. Dee publicly fell apart in 5 pieces, while its partner was still in the air. She dismantle reproduction and what she had learned, and imbued a small knife with it and threw. The knife opened a second griffin head to tail at 30 paces. The voice in her head told her, calm as weather, that her ability had reached level 9 and that 2 new skills had awakened, target capture and surefire dismantle. She did not have time to wonder what they were. She learned them on the animals above her. The fight went for hours. She knew this because the light was blue by the time Alfred came running back up the street with a cylinder in his hand. Something old, something dwarven, something the guild archive had been keeping for exactly one contingency, and he planted it in the cobblestones and twisted the top. A pillar of pale gold light rose from it, lit the whole sky, and did something to the griffin's navigation that made them circle it instead of them. Rescue came from the east. Jade teleported in with Mimi beside him and 24 Salvatoros adventurers behind them. Henry had sent everyone he had. Rurika came through the teleport 2 seconds later, holding her saint staff, pale and ferocious. Marriott's was still fighting. The last griffin came apart under Marriott's sword at dusk. The square was a scatter of about 90 bodies. No human had died. Alfred had taken a claw across the shoulder and was on one knee. Owen was bleeding from a cut over the eye. Doldo was cursing in 3 languages. She was standing in the middle of the square with a blood-smeared knife and hair that had come entirely out of its pin. And Marriott's walked across the square and stopped in front of her without saying anything. He did not have the breath yet. He put his forehead against hers. He stayed there. She did not give him her answer then, either. It did not seem right. He needed water and sleep and a healer more than he needed a sentence. They dismantled 90 griffins over the next 10 days. She reached the ceiling of her level on the 4th day and spent the remaining 6 days using her skills on things too big for the warehouse. Her ability leveled to 9. The new combat branch skills sharpened with use. Marriott's was beside her the whole time, silent, helping move bodies, handing her knives, watching her work with the half smile she had not seen on him in public before. On the 11th day, he came to find her at breakfast, and he asked her to dinner. Anne, across the table, said she would take Pichon for the evening, and deposited her under her arm in a manner Pichon interpreted as an insult, but tolerated. Sachi put her hair up with the silver pin. She walked with him to a quiet restaurant in the old town that had been a restaurant since his grandparents had been young. and they ate a meal she did not remember eating. He asked her, over the coffee, if she would be his one and only. She answered him this time. She answered without making him wait. She said, because she had had 11 days to think about it. First as lovers then. Please take care of me. He stood up. He came around the table. He put both hands on her face and kissed her once, briefly, and it was the cleanest moment of her 21 years on two worlds. They walked back toward the guild in the dark. His hand was in hers. She was not walking. She was floating through a city. An old man stepped out of an alley at the corner. He was bent. His cloak was travel-worn. His hair was long and white and fell across his face. He dropped to his knees in the street, and he looked up at Mariots, and he said, in a voice that had been rehearsing this sentence for a decade, please return to the country, Prince Mariots. Mariots' hand closed very hard on hers. His other hand was already on the hilt of his sword. He took one step in front of her without breaking the grip of the first hand, and he faced the old man down with the amethyst eyes that had looked at her across 3 countries now, and the night went very quiet around them. She thought, through the ringing in her ears, oh, so that is what was underneath the wound. There were lives around the edges of that week she only learned about later. Anne, the morning after the Griffin War, caught her father spying on her at the reception desk from behind a potted plant. Owen had never been good at stealth. He came thundering back to his cottage that evening, burst in, and announced to his wife Iris that Anne was walking out in the streets of the capital with a boy. Iris, who had known Anne was dating Niall for 3 months, put a cup of tea in his hand and waited him out. By dinner he had agreed, reluctantly, with one final attempt at dignity, to let his daughter have her life. Alfred, in the cafeteria, a night Sachi did not know about, sat hunched over his plate alone. Layla, who she would later learn had loved Alfred quietly for years and had never said so, sat down across from him without asking. He told her, in a voice she was not there to hear, that he had been heartbroken, that he had decided not to confess to Sachi because his feelings had become too big to put into someone else's lap without asking first, that he was, at the end, a coward. Layla, she was told, reached across the table, took his hand, and told him that stepping back for the sake of someone you love is not cowardice. She said the word noble, which was not a word she used easily. He walked her to her shop door. He did not say what he was feeling. She did not either. Sachi would find out about both of them from On, much later, over tea, not from either of them, ever. And on a D-rank adventurer's first evening, walking into the counter with a dead turkey, a boy named Rex saw her talking to Mariots across the dismantling room and realized, with the particular clarity of the young, that he would never be what she was choosing. His first impulse was to hate it. His second, which she found out about years later, when he was an A-rank and they shared a drink in a different city, was to decide to become the kind of man a woman like her would not have to choose against. All of this, she learned later. The night of the old man in the alley, she knew nothing of it. The night of the old man, she knew only that her hand was in Mariutz's and his other hand was on a sword, and that the story she had been inside for a year had just become a story she did not yet understand. The old man did not get up from the street. Mariutz held his sword between them. Sachi held her breath. The lanterns along the alley were still lit, and the night was quiet in a way that felt like a held pot about to boil. And the old man, hair white, hands shaking, looked up at Mariutz with wet eyes and said the sentence he had clearly been rehearsing for a decade. Please, your highness, you must come home. Your brother is dying. Your kingdom is dying. Only you can. Mariutz cut him off, not with the sword, with a word. I killed a dragon, he said. I am a criminal in Dragua. I am not your prince. The old man made a sound like something had broken inside him. He fell onto his hands on the cobblestones. Mariutz did not move from in front of her until the old man had pulled himself up and staggered backwards into the alley and gone. And even then, he did not sheathe the sword for another minute. He turned to her. He did not look at her straight. He said, "Come to my house tonight, please." She had never heard him use the word please out loud. She said yes. His house was small and clean. She had never seen the inside of it before. He had a pot on a cold stove and a book open face down on a table and a pair of boots by the door and nothing on the walls. He poured 2 glasses of something dark from a bottle he had not opened in a long time. He sat on the floor across from her. He did not take off his sword. He drank. He said, "Finally, I was the second prince of Dragua. I left over 10 years ago. That is all I will say tonight." He drank another glass of whatever it was. He closed his eyes. He said without looking at her, "In my homeland, dragons are sacred. The man who kills one is not an S rank. He is a heretic." Then he said nothing else. He fell asleep on the floor against the wall. She sat with him. She did not move. Pichon curled on her knee and watched him breathe. She did not know what she had walked into. She knew that whatever was behind him was a wound the size of a kingdom, and that he was trying to close it himself by not speaking. At some point, she slept too. She woke on a cushion he had moved under her head without her knowing. Dawn was at the windows. The bottle was gone. He was in the kitchen, quietly, making them breakfast. He made her eggs. He toasted bread. He set the plates down, and he said, for the first time since she had known him, "I am sorry." She asked him what for. He did not answer. He ate. She told him he did not have to answer. He put his hand on the back of hers across the table. He did not look at her. He said, "Do not leave." She did not, and caught her sneaking in through the guild's back hallway the next morning at 7. She said nothing. She only leaned against the door frame and raised both eyebrows. Sachi said, too fast, that nothing had happened, which was the truth in the way that nothings are sometimes the heaviest things in a week. She said that she would not ask. She said it with a grin that meant, obviously, that she was going to extract every detail from her over-ale that same evening, which she did. Sachi told her about the kingdom. She told her about the second prince. She told her about the binding stone pouch she had noticed he had prepared in advance. She stopped smiling. She said, quietly, he is not planning to leave you alone. No, Sachi said, he is planning for someone to take him. 2 weeks passed. They were the quietest 2 weeks of her life in either world. Marriott's trained adventurers at the guild every morning. The class was full every day, and there was a line out the door. And Alfred trained with them enthusiastically enough to come home every night with new bruises that Layla medicated with a tight mouth. Pichon sat on the training yard wall and made critical noises about everyone's footwork. Owen suggested, half joking, that Marriott's become a guild instructor after his retirement. She cooked on her days off. She brought lunch. Marriott's ate everything she put in front of him. He did not mention Dragua. He did not mention the old man. He did not act like he was waiting for something. He acted like a man who had decided to live in the apartment of the present and not pay rent on any other. On the 12th day, he gave her a stone. It was pale. It was small. It fit in her palm. He handed her an empty pouch with a silk cord that he had sewn himself. The stitches were neat, which did not surprise her, but did land. And he said, carefully, this is called a binding stone. It was one. It was split. Each half pulls toward the other. He told her to hold it. He told her to think of him. She did. The stone warmed against her palm like a small animal waking up. A second stone, the one in his own hand, glowed at the same time. He exhaled, and in the exhale, she heard, for the first time, the shape of the anxiety he had not let her see. Even if we are far apart, he said, this will bring us together. Sachi, stay as you are. I will be yours for as long as you are yours. She thanked him. She put the stone in its pouch. She put the pouch around her neck. She did not take it off. He walked her home that evening, as he had every evening for 2 weeks. The old man came out of the alley at the corner. Marriott's was already drawing his sword. Pichon was already in the bag. The old man had not come with words this time. He had come with a round glowing ball the size of a fist, and when he opened his hand, the ball left his palm and flew between her and Marriott's, and landed at Marriott's feet, and opened into a teleportation circle the color of deep blood. Marriott's turned toward her, and she saw, for the last time that night, the amethyst of his eyes look at her. He did not say anything. He only reached. She reached back. Their hands did not quite meet before the circle closed over him, and the light bent, and he was gone. The old man was gone a second later. A small flash, a soft collapse of air. She stood in the middle of the street with a lit binding stone pulling hard, north, against her sternum. She did not collapse. She did not remember the decision not to. Pichon poked her cheek twice before she remembered how to move. She began walking, then running, back toward the guild, with her hand closed over the stone, and the stone's heat burning through the silk around her neck. Ririka came around the corner of the guild block and nearly collided with her. She was in traveling dress. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be halfway across the northern continent on the Demon King campaign. She put both hands on Sachi's arms. She had come back, she told her, because the northern trail of Miasma, the hero party had been following, had bent, a month ago, south, toward Dragua, and Prince Brian had insisted they double back. Sachi did not hear the rest of the explanation. She told her, her voice strange in her own ears, that Marriott's had just been taken by a man with a magic ball to a kingdom she did not have a map of, and she was going there. She said, without pause, of course you are. Prince Brian met them at the guild within the hour. The hero party, Ririka as saintess, Brian as leader, 3 more adventurers Sachi did not have time to learn the names of yet, had been investigating a pan-continental miasma leak for months. The trail was Dragua. They had been preparing a docking at the port of a neighboring country to investigate the rumors and sail south to knock on Dragua's door. Brian looked at her across the guild table and said, with the formal edge of a prince who had at some point in the past year decided she was worth formality, that he would take her with them. She showed him the binding stone. He did not know until that moment that it was Dragua royal technology. He knew it the moment he saw it glow. He looked at Raferedia. He looked at Alfred, who had come in from the training yard mid-conversation. He said quietly, "It will be faster with her." Mimi came in by teleport from Salvatos a half hour later with a small entourage. Jade was with her, healed, ready to teleport them to the port they needed to leave from. Mimi had brought, in her hands, a map of Dragua's coastline she had been quietly preparing in her archive since the Raferedia year. Owen did not approve. He said so, loudly. Alfred told him to be quiet. Alfred, who had stepped back from Sachi weeks ago, spoke for her in that room, as the A-rank he had once been, and as the submaster he was now. He said she was going, and he was going with her. He said it in a voice Owen did not argue with. She sat at the edge of the meeting table, with the stone against her chest, and Rurika's hand on her shoulder, and a hero party rearranging itself around her rescue, and she did not know how to feel about any of it. Anne came in halfway through the meeting, and stood beside her, and did not say anything. Her hand on her back said what she did not need to. She knew, without having to count, that she had, somehow, without noticing when the story had quietly shifted under her feet, become the person a room was arranging itself around. The woman called Aunt in a throne room a lifetime ago. The Dismantler, who was not supposed to matter. The hero party was following her now. She found the thought did not make her proud. It made her tired. It made her look north, toward where the stone was pulling. She stood up. "When do we leave?" Brian answered. "Tonight." She nodded. She went to pack. She did not cry yet. She was saving that for the boat. She cried on the boat. She cried on the third morning, after they had teleported to the northern port, boarded a ship that had a wind blessing on its sails and a weather blessing on its keel, and put 4 days of open sea between them and the nearest land. She had packed quickly. She had not let herself sit for a full 3 days. On the third morning, the wind dropped and the deck was empty, and she leaned on the railing and let the thing she had been holding back fall out of her in one long, ugly, silent sob. Pichon sat on her shoulder and did not say anything. Alfred, coming up the stairs from below, saw her, turned around without a sound, and let her have it. She was not crying because he was taken. She was crying because she had known, since the night of the old man, that she had been going to be taken to the place that had hurt him. She was crying because the shape of his wound had a kingdom-level size, and she had accepted, without asking herself the question honestly, that the shape of her year was going to close around it. After she was done, she washed her face and went to breakfast. She did not know then what was happening to him on the other side of the water. She had pieced it together since. Some of it from Mariutz, quietly, in the weeks after the rescue. Some of it from Theodore in a throne room. Some of it she had to guess. She told it the way she told Alfred's wyvern story, because a thing that happened to a man she loved had a right to be told. He woke on a bed that was too soft. The room around him was his old room. The stone cracked over the window was the stone cracked over the window of his boyhood. The faint burn mark by the cold hearth had been put there by a wooden training sword he had split 20 years ago. The ceiling had the same constellation of damp spots the ceiling had had when he was 10. The bed had been remade. The bed was the same bed. He was chained to it, not cruelly, with royal-grade manacles he recognized. He knew, even before he checked, that the window was warded against anyone but a Dragua-blooded hand opening it. He knew, even before the door opened, who was going to walk through it. His older brother, Theodore, came in with the travel cloak of a man trying not to be seen. He was taller than Mariutz remembered. His eyes were his mother's, and his mother had been dead for 6 years. Theodore did not sit. He stood at the foot of the bed, and he said, as if reading from a document he had been keeping under his pillow for 10 years, "Our father ordered you returned. He ordered the valley prepared. The dark dragon that lives in the forbidden forest is swelling, and the miasma it is releasing is killing the country, and you, as the only other man of this bloodline who can be put on an altar, are meant to be the next offering." He did not soften the words. Mariutz did not ask him to. They sat in the shape of the sentence together for a minute. He had been the second prince. He had been born to be a spare for his older brother, and had lived the first 10 years of his life in a hallway where tutors came and went on a schedule that did not include warmth. He had loved a few small things. The books his mother had smuggled in, the swordsmaster who had taken pity on him, a ginger cat that had slept on his chest for 2 winters and then died. But he had not been loved by the people who were supposed to. He had not known how to miss them. He had known, even at 10, that his brother's coronation day would be the day his usefulness ended. He had been correct. On the morning after Theodore was crowned crown prince, he had woken up poisoned. He had been small enough that the poison had not finished the job. He had been 15. The kitchen servant who had done it had disappeared inside the week. The next month, he had been poisoned twice more. His wet nurse had tried to smother him with a pillow on the 4th attempt. His favorite guard, the one who had pretended to laugh at his jokes for 10 years, had been seen handing something to the man who had nearly put a knife in his throat. He had stopped trusting anyone. He had begun to watch the shape of the forbidden forest at the edge of the palace's farthest window. One night, at 12, 3 men had come into his room. He had fought with a wooden sword because he had slept with it under his pillow for a month. He had cracked 2 ribs, his own, not theirs, before a 4th man came out of the corner he had not thought to check and pressed a sweet-smelling cloth against his face. He had woken in the Forbidden Valley, bound to a stone altar. The men had not looked at him. They had been praying. He had understood, slowly, that the men who had been ordered to deliver him to the dragon were not going to kill him themselves. They were going to let the dragon do it, because the killing of a prince by a priest was a sin, but the killing of a prince by a god was a sacrament. He had thought, in the hour before the dragon came, that he did not want to die. He had not known, before that hour, that he wanted to live. The dragon came. It ate 3 of the priests before it reached the altar. He learned later that this was why they always brought extras. And then, something else came after the dragon. An adventurer, 1 man, iron gray hair, short gray beard, a weapon that did not match the armor, a face the dragon could not kill as easily as it was used to killing. He fought it for most of an hour. He won. He walked up to the altar, stepping across the dragon's body as if it were a long, hot stone, and he untied the boy. He asked him his name. Mariots told it. He told him also that he had been a prince and no longer intended to be. The man, whose name he told Mariots some weeks later was Vargas Victor, had laughed shortly without pleasure and said that if he was no longer a prince, he needed somewhere to go, and an adventurer could always use an apprentice with a will to live. Mariots had asked him, looking up at him from the altar stone, "Don't betray me." Vargas had met his eyes and said, "All right." 5 years. Vargas was not a kind teacher. He made Mariots work in a forge for a year before he allowed him to hold a real sword. He made him sleep on stone for a year after that. He made him win fights against men twice his size before he took him into his proper adventuring work. In the 5th year, at a small guild on the eastern border of the continent, an appraiser with sharp eyes looked at Mariots across a counter and went pale. The boy's blessing, the dormant heavenly blessing every child in this world is born with and most never need to use, was Sword Saint, the rarest of the gifts, 1 or 2 a generation, less. Vargas retired to his homeland the next spring. He was old. He had, he said, taught what he had to teach. He shook Mariots' hand at a crossroads, and he told him, very quietly, "Someday you will find someone to heal your wounds and trust without counting the steps." Mariots took his surname. He thanked him. He did not see him again. He killed a dragon the next spring. He became the continent's only S-rank adventurer. 5 years later, when he was 25, he walked into a throne room in a country that was not his homeland, and he ordered a frightened woman in work clothes to get out of his way. In the prison room of his childhood, 10 years after Vargas's goodbye, he opened his eyes and looked at his brother. He said, in the flat voice he had been using since he was 11, "I am angry at the people who tried to kill me, but they gave me freedom in the end. I am happier as an adventurer than I would ever have been as a spare." Theodore, to his credit, did not defend their father. He took a breath. He said, low and careful, "The country is corrupt, past saving. The blind dragon faith is the rot. The people deserve better than my father. I intend to spend my life atoning for what my family has done. I am asking, as a brother, not as a crown. You are the only S-rank on this continent. Kill the dark dragon." Mariots was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I will, on one condition. Our father confesses publicly what he did to me and what he has done to the offerings before me. I do not want revenge. I want the record." Theodore closed his eyes. He said, "Yes." He left the room. The door locked behind him. Mariots lay back on the bed and, at the center of his chest, under the shirt they had dressed him in to be a prince again, he felt the pulse of a small pale stone he had been carrying since the morning he had given its other half to the only woman who had ever seen him and stayed. He closed his hand over it. "I am coming," he said into it, quietly, so that no guard could hear. The ship hit real trouble on the 6th day. A miasma kraken, the size of the deck, surfaced alongside them, in waters Prince Brian had warned were monster infested. It was the largest miasma-corrupted thing Sachi had ever seen. Rurika's staff was already up. Brian had his sword half drawn. Lush, the hero party's mage, who carried a teddy bear charm tied to the top of her staff and had not spoken to her since they had boarded, was readying a containment. Finn, the warrior, was still seasick below decks. Noel, the priestess, came up the steps and made a small frightened sound. Sachi reached into her bag. She threw a small knife with "Dismantle Reproduction" imbued on it, and then another, and then, because at this point, she had been testing the limits of her combat skill tree for weeks. A third, with surefire dismantle, written into it. The Kraken came apart across the surface of the water in the 17 pieces an adult Kraken comes apart into. It rained squid rings onto the deck, and Pichon, whose restraint had limits, flew down and ate one the size of her own head. The party was silent. Brian turned toward her. He said, with the care of a man reissuing a standing invitation, "Join us, please. We have earned the right to ask." She looked at him. She looked at Rurika. She looked at the bag Pichon had tumbled out of. She thought about a counter in a guild in a kingdom to the south, and a man in a basement appraising a woman nobody had asked for, and the word home she had not been able to say aloud until a year ago. She shook her head. She said, quietly, "I have a guild." He did not argue. He nodded once. Lush, who she would later discover did not speak for weeks at a time, but held stronger feelings than any of them, put her hand lightly on her forearm for a second and walked back below. They made Dragua on the 8th day. The port was cold. The people were cold. An elderly woman in plain robes met them at the dock without a smile and took them to a shuttered guest house on the edge of the city. The binding stone in the pouch around her neck was warm through the silk, and it had been pulling, steady and strong, since the moment they had crossed the bay, north and north and north. She showed the stone to the party. Lush, who, again, she discovered had been more useful than she had been letting on, put a transparency blessing on all of them for the night. They went out. They walked through the city in half-light. The people of Dragua spoke in hushed voices about the offering and the royal blood and the dragon that is waking, and they learned in one evening what the Salvatos archive had only guessed. Mariutz was to be put on an altar at the dark of the next moon in 3 nights. She held the stone in her palm all night. They planned the route at dawn. The castle was at the center of the old city. The Dragon's Valley was north of it. The party would split. Brian's mages would open a way at the outer wall. Ririka would hold the miasma clearing formation. Sachi would take Alfred and Pichon into the castle itself along the Binding Stone's path. The stone was pulling harder the closer they got to the castle. She put a hand to her chest, and she thought, deliberately, "I am coming." And the stone warmed through the cloth under her palm in a way that was not a coincidence. They moved at dusk. The castle gates came into their view a half hour later. She could see the window she somehow knew, without having been told by anyone, was his. She could see from the angle of the stone's pull which turret it was behind. She had not come all this way to hesitate at a gate. She set her feet on the first stone step. Alfred was at her left. Pichon was on her shoulder. Rurika's staff was lit behind her. The hero party, who had followed her across a continent, was moving into position at the outer wall. She took the second step. 7 days earlier, in a city behind them, Anne was delivering lunch to her father. It was cockatrice sauté. Owen had not been sleeping. The monster outbreak in Salvatos had spread along the border in the last week, and reports had begun to come in from the south. Alfred had sent a raven by evening magic every 2 days with an update. The latest had said only sea clean. Dragua reached, going in tonight, and put the tray down. She pressed a fatigue recovery potion into Owen's hand. She told him, with the same blunt warmth that had made Sachi fall in love with her on her 4th day in this world, that she would handle the reception desk alone until they came home. He cried into his lunch the way a big man cries when he has been too tired for too long. Then he drank the potion. Then he picked up his quill and went back to work, and stood at the window of the office afterwards. She looked south. The sun was at the top of the sky, and the wind was moving through the courtyard, and the capital of Doran Kingdom went on with its day without knowing. Yet, that the woman who had become its home was at that moment climbing the first step of a foreign castle with a glowing stone at her throat. She said quietly to the glass, "Come home, all of you." She turned away from the window. She went back to work, her foot set on the 3rd step. The stone was hot through the pouch. The castle loomed above her. Somewhere inside, he had just said, into a pale stone at his own chest, "I am coming." She had said it the same moment. From the other side of the wall, she did not know yet that his next volume was going to begin at the foot of a dragon, and hers was going to begin at the head of a throne room. She did not know that what she was walking into would be longer and harder than anything she had yet survived. She knew only this. He had come for her at a salamander counter, at a festival gate, at a sea lake, at a forest quest, at a cemetery, dawn. She was coming now. She took the 4th step. Alfred went up the 5th beside her. Ririka's light kindled the gate behind them. The story she had been inside for a year opened into the next room, and she walked into it.